This episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is brought to you by OWC, Isotope, Atom Audio, JZ Microphones, and Spectra 1964. You're hearing my voice right now on the JZ V12 microphone through the Spectra 1964 STX100D mic pre and C610 complementer with Isotope, RX, Ozone, and Neutron all recorded safely onto an OWC SSD and mixed on Atom Audio monitors. Please remember to check out our awesome sponsors using the link in the show notes. It's a great way to help support this show. Now get ready to rock.
For some reason, I had a mental block about that room. Like, I can't do anything in here. Why would I want to do anything in here? It kind of forced me in 2020 to like, well, if I want to do mixes, I'm going to have to do them from home. So let me do them in here. And now it's where I mix, and I love it. Like, you know, it's a smaller room, so it's not great as far as acoustically, but it's pretty good. I do my rock wool panels, and I've got some bass traps. I just use SonarWorks on the main monitors.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. My recording studio is proudly powered by OWC, and I love how it's improved and sped up my workflow. OWC can connect all your audio work drives, trackballs, mix controllers, MIDI keyboards, audio interfaces, displays, or cameras so that you can work fast and focus on making your best record ever. Go check out the Mini Stack STX, Thunder Bay 4, or Gemini Thunderbolt 3 dock at macsales.com/rockstars to find the perfect solution for your studio from OWC. Psst. Hey Rockstars, over here. I've got a secret to tell you about how I get a consistent sound mixing over 1,000 hours of Recording Studio Rockstars. My secret is using Isotope, RX, Ozone, and Neutron on every single episode. Right now, you're hearing RX breath control, D-click, D-clip, DS, D-plosive, voice denoise, Ozone multiband compression, Neutron EQ, and limiting, all from Isotope. Go to isotope.com/rockstars and use the secret code ROCK10 and get 10% off any plug-in purchase from Isotope. You can tell your friends, but, be cool about it. Howdy, Rockstars. It's your host, Lid Shaw, and welcome back to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is Joe Costa, a freelance engineer mixer in Nashville, Tennessee, originally from Dartmouth, Mass., close to my hometown, a graduate of Berklee College of Music. Joe started out at Syncro Sound in Boston before moving to Nashville in '93. Since then, he's worked in many great studios like Sound Emporium, Treasure Isle, House of David, and RCA Studio A, and with many great artists, producers, and engineers through his career, like Richard Dodd, also a guest on the show, William Shatner, whom we talked about the last time you were here, Joe, and Joe Baldridge, who's also been a guest on the show, and also for more than a decade with Ben Folds. Joe's credits also include Amanda Palmer, Elizabeth Cook, Lyle Lovett, Sara Bareilles, Kesha, and Caitlin Rose, among many others. He's been a guest on the show before, as I mentioned, on episode 90, so you can check that out to learn more about his origin story and working with Ben Folds and William Shatner. Who knows, we might talk about those things again because they're fun to talk about. Please welcome back to Recording Studio Rockstars, Joe Costa. Joe, are you ready to rock, brother?
Yeah, hell yeah. I like origin story. Sounds like like I've come up out of the mud and
sounds official.
Started, in 1993, I started, my fins turned into feet and
yeah, right. You would have, it would be like you'd have one of those T-shirts that's got like the Neanderthal man and then standing up on two legs, and then the last one is Joe Costa.
Just sitting at a console, just like kind of looking like the guy like in the, halfway up the chain or something.
All right, cool. I'm going to work on that T-shirt. So what do they call that? It's like evolution, right? Evolution to I can't even spell, to console, to mixing. All right, groovy. So yes, Rockstars, if you can't tell right now, we are both sitting in the studio here doing an interview. And this is no comment on the reasons why, but this is the first in-person interview I've done in a minute, because I got into that process of doing the whole Zoom thing.
Yeah.
And then, or actually I was using Skype for quite a while. I just switched to Zoom, but it's been so convenient and so efficient that I was stuck on that. And then now I'm just like, all right, I'm ready to like do these, I need an efficient way to do this for the in-person thing. So anyway, glad to have you here, dude. It's good to see you again.
It's so great to see you too. I haven't seen you in a while. And,
It has been a minute. I used to run into you most often in the coffee shop.
Yes.
Be waiting in line.
Ugly mugs, maybe.
Yeah, probably ugly mugs. Oh, right. Because are you East Side as well?
I'm not, but I have a lot of friends and as we all do over here, and working with people at their studios or whatever. So you take the break, and I think at that time, Ugly Mugs was the closest. So just walk right over.
True. So what are some studio? You guys you work with Ben Folds over at, what do you guys call his studio? It was RCA B, right? Or something
No,
like
it was
that?
RCA A, and then that turned into Javelina.
Right. I remember that's when I visited it, was Javelina, and then maybe again after that.
Yeah. And then he had it for, I always kind of forget when I started working with him. I think it was 2002. And then it was just, he didn't really have a name for it. I think he wanted to call it like Crapalina. Because it was his own little place,
Right.
And I think, in fact, because he had a Studer 800 at that point, and I think the track sheet said Crapalina on it for a little while, but it was only.
Was it when you guys started working there? Did it definitely feel like this is an old school studio?
Oh yeah, and it's funny because I'd lived here for forever. 1993, I guess. Yeah, so when I moved here, and that's just one of the studios I'd never been in. I'd always heard of it, like Javelina, Big Pig, that kind of thing.
Right.
And I never walked in there. And when I first met Ben and we went over to the studio, I walked in and was just like, oh, this place is huge. Like I had no idea.
Yeah.
And then, 12 years later, I'm still in there, it's like I sort of didn't leave for a while.
Well, we talked about it. I'm sure we talked about it the last time we did an interview, but no harm in mentioning it again. So the bigness, when you talk about it being big, it's because you walk in and it was one of these classic huge soundstage designs, right? So that with the clouds, I guess they call them clouds. It's like these rounded diffusers way up high. It's gymnasium size.
It is,
right?
But it's kind of like, it's not super dead, but it's not super live either. It's very, very neutral sounding. I'm trying to remember. Yeah, it's like I don't remember what you call them, but on the walls, they're like these half long, kind of half sort of rounds that would go along the length of the walls, basically. And then I think on the ceiling was just regular ceiling, ceiling, what would you call them? Not ceiling tiles, I don't know if it's what goes into like office, in between the metal ceiling, whatever you call them. I believe that was way up top, but then they had all these chandeliers that had a lot of carvings in them that were kind of funny. They're like really light tin. In fact, there used to be a portable stair thing that you could wheel around to change light bulbs. And I think I tried it once and I was like, nope. Even though it was pretty safe, I just didn't like being up that high. And then
like the library ladders.
Yeah, and then you could you'd go to grab one of the lights, but those things just swung around freely, so you kind of didn't have anything to hold on to when you grab it.
That's scary.
I think I tried it once. I was like, I don't know about how.
That's the stuff they don't teach you that in school, right? When you're thinking about a studio and you're like, I want this big room and I want a big space. So, for example, where my drums go, I think it's like, I don't know what it is, 16 feet, 20 feet from the top of the snare drum up to the ceiling, because it's a tall space.
Yeah.
And it was like, and it made perfect sense to put lights up there by the window and lights that shine everywhere and the track light and everything. And then we're done. And I was like, oh shit, how do I change a light bulb?
I know. Then you got to figure out a way to get up there, right?
And right now it would literally, in order to put a light bulb in fact, when we put them in, it took 2 or 3 story scaffolding on wheels. I'm like, how am I going to do that? So hopefully the lights never go out.
When I was an intern at Treasure Isle, I think lights would go out, and then they had a weird. I haven't even been in there in forever. Like it's probably been. I want to say 20 years, or there's probably less than that, maybe 15 or something. But that's also another high room and much more live than RCA. But they had this ladder that would go. It was a giant, like an A-frame ladder, but then that wasn't tall enough, so there was like a middle ladder that came up the middle. So you would have to climb up that, and I just never even did it. I was like, I'm not. I mean, I did a lot as an intern, but I was like, there's no way. I mean,
so basically, we should build rock climbing walls onto the walls of our studio. That would actually be a great business plan.
Be a great idea. Yeah.
So that reminds me, my brother's got a music school in Brooklyn, and they would do summer camps, and then next door there was this rock climbing place, so they did a summer camp where they signed the kids up, and they're like, well, you can't just do music all the time. They got to be active too. So it became Rocking Scales and Scaling Rocks was the name of the thing. So which is perfect for our studios, right? We just have like the big room, and you put up some rock climbing walls, and it's, do a session. Just, it's probably good incentive. You don't want to lose your grip because you'll fall on a drum set and, get impaled by a mic stand.
But you look like you're in shape. Looks like you can do all that stuff. I can't,
No. Climbing is hard.
I'm not a big guy, but I'm just not in shape at all.
You're in pretty good shape, man. I mean, come on, our profession is designed for us to not be in good shape. I feel like,
That's true.
It's a lot of sitting around. We're sitting right now. What are we doing?
That's right.
So tell us a little bit about your studio now. So obviously, it's been years since we did an interview. It's been years, Joe, since we did an interview.
Yeah.
And you've done a bunch of things. What's new with your studio or the studios that you find yourself working in a bunch right now?
I find myself working in, if I can, Sound Emporium. I love Sound Emporium. I love both of the rooms for different reasons. And the staff is always awesome there. Juanita, the manager, is phenomenal. And I just love it there, for tracking. It's great.
Maybe you should describe it for us, because it's been also years since I've been there. And I think that it's gone through iterations, different kind of consoles and stuff over the years.
Yeah,
right?
so the A room is fairly big, but it's completely dead. If you walk in there, it's almost like your ears suck up into the...
Do I recall it having kind of that old school Nashville design where there's like fake rooftops coming over sound booths? You're like, am I in a Polynesian restaurant?
That's right. And then it's right. And then there's like these wooden, kind of like round kind of wooden things with doors on them. And there's a chamber in each one.
Oh,
an old school chamber. Yeah. So you can actually open the door. If people have never seen that before and I'm working with someone, I just say, here, stick your head in here, and it's like, that's what that is.
That's the importance. There are elements of studios that are mostly important for the studio tour. Mm-hmm. Like you get the biggest bang for the buck on just showing it. It's like my Optagon upstairs.
Yeah.
Doesn't get used in a lot of sessions, but it makes a hell of a good studio tour. Right?
Yeah. They have, a couple chambers and in the A room. And it's got that old school vibe. There's a lot of room on the floor, but they do have ISO booths, and it just sounds really good. You know what I really appreciate that room, but what I really appreciated I was working with, it was an artist named Gabriel Kelly, and we were doing that session. It was a while ago. It was maybe like 5 years ago or something, but that session was all to 2-inch. And I treated it old school 2-inch. Like, we got the master takes. I cut off the master takes, put it on a master reel, all this stuff, did all the overdubs. And then at the end of the 4 or 5 days, then we dumped the whole thing to Pro Tools for them to finish it off and mix it. I think Lex Price, I can't remember who mixed it. It was either Lex or maybe Gabe even mixed it.
Oh, nice. So it was Lex producing it as well or something?
Yeah. And Lex did it. I think Lex mixed it, and he did such a great job. And
I haven't seen Lex in too long. Shout out to Lex.
I've been seeing him quite often lately, which has been great. He, so he was producing that. And, but the thing that really got me with Studio A, Sound Emporium A, was there were we'd have, kind of full band. And then later on at night, it would just be maybe 3 or 4 people, and they would do like acoustic vocal with maybe like Lex would put his bass amp close to them and really quiet. And then they just wouldn't use headphones for these little second half of the day things. And so and I walked into the room and they were playing. We had them in a little circle, no drums. Like drummer went home, so yeah, bass quiet and no headphones. So they just kind of mixed themselves there, and it was so quiet. And I was able to gain up the mic pretty
so
hot.
Singing with no headphones too.
Yeah, no
singing,
just
right?
nothing. We just Gabe Dixon was also playing piano too.
Oh,
So
cool.
he would kind of like have the upright piano there. Then I guess we arranged everyone near Gabe basically for that part of the session. And so it was cool because they were playing so quiet. I was able to gain up the mic breeze really hot. And it sounded huge because, when you get that sound when people play quiet and you get to turn things up like that, things sound really big. But the extra added bonus of that room was I turned it up and there was like no noise floor. There was no I didn't feel like I needed to. I probably did do some low end cuts just, because I didn't need all that low end. But I wasn't hearing any rumble. I wasn't hearing anything. All that stuff, when you bring up all that gain, you normally okay, now I'm starting to hear the room.
Right.
Let's figure this out, or let's,
So you're saying the room design itself was so
I was able to gain things up
and
really hot and not really hear any room noise come up with it. It was awesome. And that's perfect for that room. And that room also is great for that situation with a full band as well. If they're playing, there's another record I did with, I think I included it on the playlist there. It was Jeremy Ivey, Margot Price's husband.
Yes, yeah.
And Margot was producing that. And
I was digging that.
Yeah.
My note says Amanda Palmer and Jeremy Ivey, examples of great lyricists.
Oh, excellent lyricist. Yeah, Jeremy. Yeah, both of them for sure. Yeah, and Matt Rossbang mixed most of it. I mixed a couple of them, but that was a track 2 tape situation and doing the overdubs. And
but did you run the tape machine and align it and all that? Kind of stuff?
I'm a little OCD and so I aligned it myself. And it's funny, it all comes back. It's just like, here it is. Okay.
What'd you use?
Yeah, I used ATR.
Okay.
And +3 over 250. And I had to look up the bias on their website, but they tell you for what machine, what bias they recommend at 10K. So I did that. And demagged the heads before all of that. And it's funny how it comes all right back. And so with his record, we had everybody on the floor, except I had him behind they had like a giant baffle. So he was doing acoustic and vocal, but he was kind of like overlooking the band. And I had baffles between the guitarists and the drummer. And I had like little cubicles for the amps, bass amp as well. And everyone was cool with it. And what I did was they did use headphones, but I got a drum sound and then kept drums on the floor. And then we added bass, added guitar, added the second guitar. And as we did that, I just adjusted everybody's volume. Everyone was cool with it. So, and basically I made it so if you weren't listening to vocal, you wouldn't have been able to hear Jeremy if you didn't use headphones, but pretending that there was no vocal, you could take the headphones off and you could hear everybody equally.
Yeah.
So that, and chill sounding. And that room is great for that. So you could do you could do a band where you're all mixing yourself, and that room just really supports that. Like that's the great. A room. That is like great. And it's an old school room. So
can you do big, tall gobos like old Olympic studios?
Yeah. I mean, they have a lot of them, and they're old too. And some of them are like, I'll get splinters when you move them. It's like, oh,
it's a sign of a real gobo.
That's right. You get a splinter.
With splinters in your hand.
Yeah, it's cool. It's great for that. And they used to have a VR console in there, but now they got one of the new API. I guess it's called Access AXS. It's like
right.
It sounds great. It's excellent.
I think I'm going to see one of those. Well, of course, this will come out later, but I'm going to see one at Strange Weather Studios. I believe that's the one that I'm about to see there.
It's cool. I think it's got automation built in. I didn't need, I wasn't mixing there, but but yeah, there's like a little screen with automation if you wanted to mix on the console.
So it's sort of like it's old school analog, but very new school digital integration.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. And it's got your 550Bs, I think they had, and some 560s in there, but yeah, it's a great sounding console. And of course, then the B room is a smaller room, but it's live. It's like really live. So you can get the big kind of like, drum, you can get your drum rooms cranked and all that stuff. And that's got an API legacy in it. And that's a wonderful room too. I've done tons of sessions in there. I love that room too. So, but yeah.
When you're using those different 550 and the 560 EQs, One of them, the 550 gives you you can boost or cut and you select a frequency and it's sort of more broadband, right? And the 560 is the graphic.
Graphic, yeah. And those are pretty wide EQs as well. Like I think the way
what instruments do you think of when you're like, oh, I'd use one or the other?
Oh man, they're a little interchangeable for me, but I do like you can really shape with the 560 graphics. So drums are great for like kicks. If you really have to mangle like and really amp something up, that might not be the right word, but if you really need to shape something hard, the graphics are great, and for electric guitars too. If you kind of have like, if you really need to, give it some attention. If things are a bit flat sounding.
I almost picture it as having a little more attitude and frequencies or something.
Yeah. And I think the way they work, I could be wrong, but I think they start out as you're boosting or cutting, at least on the graphics. They start out, I think the Q starts out pretty wide, and I think it gets narrower as you boost. I think.
Okay.
I think that's how that works.
Okay.
Someone may say that's not how.
I've heard that style. I don't remember what that's called, but
where
the Q adjusts. The more you boost, the sharper the Q gets. It's probably so you just hear more of it.
Right. So that's the facility I love. If I can work over there, that's great. We just did, and it may be out by the time the podcast comes out, but we just did the new Ben Folds 5, not Ben Folds 5 record, the new Ben Folds record at Joe Pisapia's place.
Oh, awesome!
Yeah, and so I spent
Joe, you're still supposed to be on this podcast, dude.
Pisapia?
Joe's over there. Yeah, he hasn't been on yet.
Oh, he needs to. He's a good time.
I know. That's all right.
There'll be a lot of laughs. He's great, and he was producing it, and his studio, of course, is awesome. Like he's got a great.
Yeah, he built a beautiful place,
quote unquote home studio, but not really.
Yeah. What Middle Tree?
Middle Tree, yeah, and we spent, I guess, probably a couple months there. Not every day, a couple months, but a good chunk of 2 months. And that room is fantastic too. It just sounds naturally beautiful. So it's like, I love working at Joe's. I've tracked there on other things. He's been nice enough to let me do projects over there occasionally.
Atom Audio can provide all your monitor needs. Whether you are setting up a first-time home studio for recording music or podcasts, or a world-class full-size studio for professional mixing and mastering in stereo or immersive sound. Featuring the XART tweeter and custom DSP onboard processing, the new A-series monitors will perfectly adapt to your studio. Get the Atom Audio monitors and subwoofers that are right for you with an extended 5-year warranty at atomaudio.com. The Jay-Z Microphone Vintage Series are built by hand in Latvia, featuring the patented Golden Drop capsule design for enhanced clarity that will give your recordings a classic vintage tone. Our friends at Jay-Z Microphones have also come up with a special offer only available to Recording Studio Rockstars listeners. Use the limited time coupon ROCKSTAR to get 40% off the V67, V47, or V12 microphones. And to make this deal even better, they'll throw in a free shock mount worth $120 for a limited time at jzmic.com. Yeah, that's a fun place. Joe's so talented. He's a great dude. And in fact, I was just watching a show last night, and I was thinking about the dynamics on the stage, and I felt like what I was seeing was a little bit loud and crashy coming off the stage. And I immediately thought, I was like, Joe Mark's brother, if those guys were playing this song, they would have just held back. It would have sounded huge because it felt huge in your mind,
right?
Without sounding necessarily overly huge off the stage.
Right.
That Rockstar's Joe Mark's brother is Joe Pisapia's band with Hags and Mark Pisapia. And just a trio, but they always did this wonderful thing of like incredible dynamic. Like you'd have to they'd get so quiet on the stage, we'd all be like leaning forward a little bit from the audience, catch it. And like all the dynamics were perfect. And that's a tricky thing to do, just in general for live or in the studio. But, just to circle back a little bit to what you were talking about, the no headphone session, I've done some of those and it's really remarkable what happens. Amy Loftus was one of the first records that I engineered that I and I think Will Kimbrough was producing that one. And I proposed, I said, let's do a no headphone session. And we did it. And to my ear, her singing just like naturally just snapped right into pitch against the guitar.
Yeah, because everyone has to listen in the same. Yeah, right. So you have to make it so everyone's listening to each other and mixing themselves to each other. I mean, that's just the way they used to do it forever ago. I mean, that's just piling onto that for a second. I was watching a panel at Ocean Way, and it was I can't remember who else was up there, but Norbert Putnam was up there from bass player Elvis, and he was also talking about I guess he produced a lot of Jimmy Buffett records too, but he was talking about, someone asked a question, and it's something to do with that, and he's with the headphone thing, and he said, I used to play upright bass as much as I used to play electric bass on sessions, and he said when I would play upright bass, you could hear me as easily as the drummer, as easily as the vocalist, as easily as the acoustic guitar player, and he said we didn't use headphones or click, and it was all in the room. And he said you wouldn't believe how quiet drummers could play back then. But that's that sound you listen to. It's just beautiful because they're all mixing themselves in the room. No one's bashing. No one's out of place. And that's a beautiful sounding leakage.
Now, do you think of that as being legit for an Elvis rocker track too?
It could be, yeah. Because I guess depending on rocker.
Like what is that?
What is that? Yeah, because it might not be like necessarily loud. It's rocking, but it probably doesn't need to be like, the drummer doesn't need to be laying on a cymbal and washing out the whole room either. So I think the intent comes across the speakers as like, that is a rocker, but they probably weren't playing like super loud.
Yeah, it's interesting. I haven't done a session where, well, let me back up. When I did do a live, this was also a live to 2-track session with no headphones. My strategy was vocals first, everything else has to fall into place. Mm-hmm. So the drums were right next to the vocals too, which again, that tip actually comes from Matt Rossbang, but I hadn't met Matt yet and I hadn't learned the tip. It just seemed like the natural thing to do. I was like, well, he has to be able to hear her sing.
That's right. Yeah. And then yes.
That was Mark Pisapia playing on that one.
And he has to be able to clue in on that stuff. Yeah. It's, but then the leakage you get between everybody is so balanced and so beautiful sounding. And then it sounds really big. Like it's a really cool thing.
And that's kind of like the Matt tip was, if the drums aren't far from the vocal, you do the opposite and they're close to the vocal, then the vocal helps become part of, like you're actually hearing a little bit of drums in it, and that's part of the sound, and you're balancing everything. Right.
And that's another interesting point too about keying off the vocalist, because a lot of times when we track, it's like, you get a drum sound, bass, guitar, and you kind of maybe modify a few things, and then the vocalist will go in. A lot of times it's a scratch vocal, and you kind of work that way. I was doing an album that Jordan Lenning was producing. It's artist, and she's a good friend of mine, Alicia Witt. She's an actress, great piano player. She's a musical artist as well. And she, it was at Sound Emporium B, and I got, drum sound, bass. And I'm thinking we just tracked drums, bass, and piano and vocal. And we were going to get the vocal with her piano. So I kind of got drums sounding pretty cool, I thought, bass. And then I had Alicia go in and play, and her vocal was naturally just bright. And that's, we had sorted that out ahead of time. Like, what mic do we want to use? We tried a bunch of mics. So when we came in that day, it was like, oh, her voice is brighter. Let me get the piano to go. Like, I might need to brighten up the piano a little bit. I was like, that's cool. Great. And then I had the whole band play, and all of a sudden the drums sounded too dark. I was like, well, wait a minute. Now I have to re-attack these drums but it was all keyed off of the way her stuff. And it's just like, oh no, now I got to circle back, which is great. I mean, it's like, and then it all kind of came together, but in the usual ways we seem to do things. It's like, you get that band sound, and the vocal will probably sound cool, but maybe you're not in, you don't know what mic you're going to use yet because you're going to do vocals later and all this. But when you're committed to that vocal sound already, and it's going to go with the piano, and then the drums have to go with it, then you kind of go like, okay, I have to brighten up the drums to work with the vocal. And it was just really cool to circle back that way. I don't know. It was kind of just
that's true. And I think, well, that brings up a bunch of questions for me. But similar to the vocal idea is that concept of like, I've never done that where I've said, let's start with the upright bass and let's make sure everything fits with that. Because it's just, sorry to the bass players, but it usually seems like the upright bass choice is a like a last consideration on the track. It's like, hey, let's play upright on this.
Yeah, it's just like, oh, now, okay, it's a little boomy. Wait a minute, is it working?
Yeah, and like the challenges of recording upright, it's like most often what I've learned is, well, you're going to have to isolate that upright bass and put a hot mic on it, and you're going to have to make it fit to this band thing in the same way that you might have to make a vocal fit to a band thing, you know?
Right.
But it's interesting, like the music that we've grown accustomed to, it's not real. You know, a lot of it is not real. It's this world that we create, you know, with this big loud rock band, but then because we can have a vocal that's isolated with lots of compression, you can have this quiet voice on top of it or something. I mean,
right.
You know, think about like Dinosaur Jr. I mean, how would that exist without?
Yeah, right.
I actually haven't seen them play live, so I know it's the loudest guitars ever.
Yeah. Have you had Matt on the show? On the podcast?
Oh, Matt Rossbang? Yeah, a couple of times. Now, did you get to work at his new studio?
No, but I've seen Memphis? Photos of it, and it looks incredible.
Yeah.
We were at last time I saw him in person was at our friend Gina Johnson's wedding, which you should have Gina on. I don't know if you've.
No, I haven't had Gina on.
She's wonderful. Yeah.
Yes, but I know about her, and I need to do that.
Yeah. She's
Gina, if you're listening, please come on Recording Studio Rockstars.
I'll give you her number. She's awesome. It was at her wedding, and I saw Matt, and then he showed me the photos, and I was like, oh, it's incredible. So
yeah,
so I'm so happy. I'm so happy for her. It's like it just looks like an old school studio, at least from photos. It looks like an old school studio that's been preserved for but it's brand new, you know?
Sometimes
he's got a good aesthetic.
You have friends, like we could probably all attest to this. Like you have friends or understand this. You have friends that just seem to have this effortless sense of style with everything they do. And like for me, I might just accept, you know what, I'm just never going to look that cool. Yeah. Matt Rossbang is a bit like that, you know? Like everything from the way he dresses to what a studio looks like, everything's just
at the wedding he had like a brown tux, man. It looked like my wife was just like, who's the guy in the brown tux? That looks cool. I'm like, because he is cool.
That's awesome. That's awesome. All right, well, let's see. So what else should we keep chatting about? You know, it's cool that you're doing records on tape. What
that's been a while. Yeah. I mean, but it was fun. It's fun to do that. Like it's just the mindset is things come back to you. It's like, oh, you know, you're winding the machine. It's like, oh, the smell of that. I forgot about that. It just kind of brings back memories.
And you naturally put your hand near the edge of the reel so that when it spins off, it doesn't go flapping everywhere.
Oh god, yeah. Although, you know, we the 8 what is it? It's not an 820. It's a I'm trying
827
it's an 827 over at Sound Emporium. And,
those ones don't need it.
No, they're like a Swiss watch or something. You know, it's just like a.
They're like the Apollo.
Yeah, that's right.
Moon lander.
Yeah, exactly. They are. Yeah, that's been a while, but it was cool to, and then realizing like, oh yeah, that's right. We have to take notes. You know, and I think Rachel Moore might have been assisting me. I'm trying to remember. We did a couple of those sessions. But it was like, you know, she was taking the notes. I just asked, you know, it's like, I'll just need to know this, this, and this. And I'll need to know where my splices are. When I cut stuff off to the master, we can reuse this tape. I can go over the splices, but I'd rather not if I can avoid it. So let's mark where they are. So I'm just aware of like, I'll just skip over it to, you know, for another take or something like that. There's funny little things that just get sucked away in your mind.
Yeah. And you also find yourself working with a piece of paper.
Yep.
Like you have to write all this stuff down.
Yeah. Erasers and pencils and.
Yeah. I remember, you know, creating my own little tape charts. You know, it's got to have like your start time. I would always have like the start time and the end time for each take, and then the title of the song, and then the take number would be there, and then notes, you know.
Yep.
And then you realize you're like, well, I don't really need the end time because the end time is the start time of the next track.
Right.
And
then the end of reel. So when you put on another reel, you can type in the end of that reel time, so you don't have to go all the way to the top to zero it. So you know, there's all these funny things that just come back to you, and then having to plan your real estate, right? So it's like, you know, it's hard to ask someone like, how many overdubs do you plan on doing? Because I mean, usually you're in the flow, or you're not in the moment, you're not in the moment yet. You don't know, but it's like, well, I need to make sure I have enough real estate for overdubs.
Like tracks.
Right. Yeah. So it's like, well, okay, well, I don't want to spread out the drums over too many because I don't want to be short. So let's see what we can kind of narrow down. And sometimes people have an idea, it's like, yeah, maybe a guitar solo and another set of keys and, give us a couple tracks, 2 or 3 tracks to do a vocal for comps, and then maybe a couple background vocals. The Jeremy stuff was easy in that way because they didn't pile on a lot of stuff. So I was able to kind of ahead of time, like, do you foresee a lot of overdubs? No, probably just this or this, and so I was prepared for a few, scenarios. And worst case scenario, it's like, well, I can go back and erase the hi-hat track probably if I need to, that kind of thing. But again, you got to think of real estate instead of being like, creating tracks and being like, okay, cool, whatever. It's like, I don't want to get stuck here,
Yeah. I remember when I took my band into the studio back in the early 90s, it was the first time we were doing a 16-track record. And I was so excited, and I drew out an entire chart for the whole record. It was like a grid. It was like each song and then 16 columns. And we all went and sat outside of Blueberry Hill on the patio in St. Louis, and just like charted out, like, okay, we pre-planned all the tracks. I was like, the tambourine will go here,
Some heavy pre-production, yeah. Right.
I don't know if we stuck to it, but it was fun to think about.
At least it's an idea. Like, at least it's somewhat of a game plan because, everything changed. A lot of times it'll change when you get in there. It's like, oh, maybe. It's funny when you look back on that stuff too. It's like, remember we had this intention of doing this, but it totally turned into that. Yeah. But,
How important do you think intention is for records? I mean, there's this concept of going in sometimes and you have parameters, like artistic parameters around what you're going to do. How often do you feel like that exists and it's relevant, or do you think it's just sort of part of the fabric of making records and we don't even think about it now?
Well, I don't know. Sometimes it's kind of nice to have like a somewhat parameters, but then knowing that it's okay to break that because, you don't want to be stuck like, we were going to do this, it's like, I don't know, but now it's turning into that. So let's let it turn into that,
Yeah.
The intention is important for me in the arrangement, because, and on this Caitlin Rose record I did, is Jordan Lenning produced it, and he's such a good arranger as well as a good producer that, we started the tracking at Sound Emporium. I can't remember if it was 4 or 5 days, and then it went to him, and it was over 2020. So he, he did a lot of overdubs at his place. By the time I got it to mix, he had all these overdubs, but they all made sense, and things went with other things for textures, and it was great. It was like, wow. So the second verse is coming up. Here's this whole thing that's propelling it. It's just like, I didn't have to fight anything in the mix. It just sort of like everything had its place. Everything made sense. Nothing was extraneous that was like, I don't know, does that work? I'll throw it in there because they have it in there. It's like, everything had an intent, and the intention, everything had a purpose, everything had and it's, to me, that's so important. There's so many times we work on mixes or projects or something where there's all these overdubs, and it's just like,
well, especially if Jordan was taking it home like that, that runs that real risk of just because he probably could have just kept adding anything he wanted and anything and anything and anything. And then also it gets back to you and you're like, maybe it only makes sense in this particular context of the moment that it was added, but if you make a few adjustments to the mix, it doesn't make sense anymore.
Right.
Those are the things that can be weird. Like there's like the fader creep of overdubs where like sometimes you find yourself overdubbing. You hear a need for something and you overdub it, but it only made sense because everything was cranked up funny in the mix,
Right. The way you were listening to it a certain way. Right. Yeah.
And then later you come back tomorrow and you listen and you're like, that didn't make sense.
It didn't make sense at all. But at least you tried it though. That's always try stuff, but yeah, to me, that's the arrangement thing it's just so important. And it's, a lot of times people just throw stuff which is fine to throw stuff like paint at the canvas, but at some point it's got to make sense, I mean, creativity, sure, throw it all in there, blah, blah, blah. But at some point things need to be weeded out and all.
Yeah. Hey rock stars, are you recording your own music or other people's music in your studio, but you're having trouble getting your mixes to sound great? Do they sound kind of weak or distant or lack punch or clarity? Well, I've got a gift to help you take your mixes from sounding like basement demos to sounding a lot closer to professional mixes. And it's my free introductory course called Mix Master Bundle. This course shows you how to get pro sound with your mixes from your home studio using free plugins and Pro Tools. And the best part is that these fundamental mixing techniques will work for you in any DAW, whether you're in Logic, Cubase, PreSonus, Studio One, Reaper, or whatever you're using. If you're ready to make your best record ever, then go to mixmasterbundle.com and get started now for free. And you can find the clickable link in the show notes of this episode. So one of the tracks in your playlist is a song called 2020 that Ben Folds did.
Yeah. And
not that we aren't all sick of talking about 2020, but I was struck by the way that song seemed to do a clever, it was like, what was the theme was like, how many crappy years can you roll into one or something like that? And I thought it was just a clever twist on, something. It was almost like it didn't really overcommit to a statement as so much as like, this screw year.
Yeah.
It's a lot. What the hell?
It's a lot. Yeah.
What the hell? Was that one that you worked on as well?
Yeah, he was all through 2020. He was living on Australia, so he had a little setup, and he did that and just sent it to me to mix. So,
and did you mix that one in the box? And what is mixing for you these days?
It's in the box, and funny 2020. I was still in the mode coming out of RCA A and all that stuff. I was still in the mode of like, I'll go somewhere to mix. So whether it was Joe Pizzappia's or Sound Emporium's got a couple of great rooms like down the hall. I think it's the Z room and the G room.
Right. You're recording in these great spaces, but they're almost like, it's almost like recording with an orchestra. You're like, I don't need the orchestra around when it's time to mix.
Right. And I'm all in the box now. Like I love being in the box. And but I would go down to like these in the box rooms, be like, oh, let's just do it there. And my house, it's not huge. So it's like, well, I guess I could build something. I think I still might at some point. But I was like, I don't know. I had this office room that sort of, it had a lot of windows. It's a craftsman house. So there's like a gazillion windows in this small room. And I was like, well, I can't do anything in here. Well, 2020 happened.
You can look out the window.
Yeah. Well, 2020 happened. I was like, maybe I can mix in here. Well, how would I go about doing that? And I just did a bunch of research, and it was just like, what? The glass actually is not reflecting more than the plaster. So basically I made my panels and set up in there, and it sounds great. It's like, why didn't I do that? I was like, why didn't I do that years ago? It's like, for some reason I had a mental block about that room. Like, I can't do anything in here. Why would I want to do anything in here? And it's like, it kind of forced me in 2020 to like, well, if I want to do mixes, I'm going to have to do them from home. So let me do them in here. And now it's where I mix, and I love it.
That's great.
It's cool. I use, it's a smaller room, so it's not great, but I do, as far as acoustically, but it's pretty good. It's, I do my rock wool panels, and I've got some bass traps, and, so my main monitors, I just use SonarWorks on the main monitors, and that just kind of.
Are they big?
No, they're like 6-inch. They're like Focal Alpha 6.5s or something like that. I don't know if I'd want anything bigger in there because it's just.
Yeah, you don't want to really excite the room.
Yeah, and I don't crank stuff too hot either. So that SonarWorks, I have a little system here. So SonarWorks for those, and then off to my left, I turn off SonarWorks, and I've got my pair of NS10s, and I have a pair of Ortotones. And in fact, out of necessity, they have to be over to my left. But I find that I love listening to balances and making mix rides with the music not being in front of me. Like 80% of the time, I like it being over to the side. I just make better decisions for some reason.
You mean the speakers are over to your side?
So like the mid-rangey ones are over to the left. So it's like, I'll just toss them over there. And it's like, no SonarWorks needed. The NS10 sound great. The Ortones sound great. And I can do like 80% of the mixes over there. And then I'll toss them back in the middle to, with the SonarWorks back on to just double check my pannings, some low end things here and there. And then another phase is I'll throw on some headphones with SonarWorks correction, and I'll also do can opener on that.
Can opener? What's that?
Yeah, that's like a crossfeed kind of program. So it doesn't emulate speakers, but it emulates speaker crossfeed for headphones. So the cool thing about that is if I turn that on in headphones, usually, if you're listening or trying to mix in headphones, it's got, it feels like the vocal and the kick and the snare all like in the center of your head.
Right.
What can opener does for me anyways, it seems to jut that stuff, all that mono stuff, like maybe like 6 inches in front of your face. And it's helpful. And also in the low end sounds like it makes sense. And
who is it? That's the name of the company?
Can opener is, I think it's Good Hertz.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. I want to say maybe it's like $40 and I find that super helpful for, the phase of mixing in headphones.
Yeah, you're right. Good Hertz.
Yeah.
Can opener studio.
Yeah. It's cool. Yeah. And so of course that phase of the mix, I'm also checking for, a lot of people listen in headphones now. So it's like, that one guitar on the left's a little hotter in headphones, but I don't hear that in speakers. So let me kind of adjust that. Oh, I hear a tick here somewhere, or there's a breath I kind of missed. It's like a big microscope. You can kind of do that. So at some point during the mix process, I'll do that. But yeah, it's funny. There's something about a lot of times when I would be mixing in rooms with a console. Sometimes I'd be mixing in the box, but like running, my subgroups out to the console, right? But so a lot of times your Pro Tools rig is sideways. So, a lot of times I'm making mix decisions from listening to the mix off to my left.
So your left ear, that's why it's golden. Your right ear is not golden, but your left ear is golden.
The left ear is golden, yeah, right. But so I always kind of like that. And then out of necessity in my little room, the mid-range speakers go off to the left, but I find that I like that. It's like I said, I get my main stuff going on in the main speakers, and then I turn that off and then go to the left. And then I'll kind of like get stuff going on that makes me happy over there. And then at some point I'll bring it over to the middle and kind of make decisions there. But it's really fun. And I'm really loving Ortones again. It's just so much fun.
Yeah. So I have a single Avant tone, which I did put in the center just to try it out. Mm-hmm. I used to have it on the left. But I love using that. The place I'm using that a lot is, especially if I'm doing a rough mix after a tracking session. So tracking session, high energy, usually higher volume for long periods of time and stuff like that. And I find that it's nice to go opposite, and I'll turn it way down quiet and I'll mix really quietly and just balance some things there. And it feels a little bit like an experiment almost. It's like, well, I can't tell if this is going to rock yet, but I'm going to trust that it's going to, and I'll hear it in the car later. And it does really cool things. It's like I'm just balancing the mids.
It really reveals a lot. Like stuff that you will just not catch on other systems.
Yeah, and like you could have an effect could be missing, and you thought it was present, but you listen on there and you're like, well, I can't even hear it.
Or you liked the reverb, and it sounded cool, and you put it on Ortones. It's like, whoa, that's way too crazy.
Right.
And then it's like you realize, like, oh, it's just too crazy. Like for some reason I'm not hearing that as pronounced in other speakers. I just think it's so cool. Like, I work on the main speakers, what I call my main speakers, and NS10s for a while. And then when I zipped over to Ortones, it'll be like, especially if I take a little break and I go to Ortones, it's like so much stuff gets revealed.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, that vocal's way too loud, or oh, like something's killing me in those guitars, And then you can kind of fix that and go to the other speakers and go like, yeah, cool, that all worked. That's plus I just kind of like, people used to complain about them. I just like the sound of them.
I think the complaint is thinking that they're supposed to sound like hi-fi speakers. It's like,
they're not
supposed to sound.
And they don't even sound crappy to me. They're just a different reference.
Yeah, just like we grew up with clock radios.
Yeah. Yeah.
I still remember my first favorite song on the clock radio.
What's that?
Lunatic Fringe.
Oh, by Red Rider?
Yeah.
Why do I remember that? Because I can't remember people's names. It's like, but I don't know why.
I think it's because Todd Rundgren covers it a lot.
Okay.
I saw him play in Nashville, and I was like, holy shit, he's playing that song. And I was like, did he write it? And then recently it came up again. What was it? Who was it that was that just came up on an interview? Although we didn't talk about it, but it was But I don't think he wrote it. I think he just covers it.
Right.
But anyway, I remember waking up, I was like, that was the song on my clock radio when I was in grade school.
I remember the video on MTV. I was like, yeah, God. And then the other one, it kind of was in that vein. Was Aldo Nova was that band? Life is Just a Fantasy. Like,
oh yeah.
Yeah, that was right around that time period.
Yeah. Well, we grew up. So were you? And you were growing up in Massachusetts as well. So, we had. Well, first of all, did you have a sense? Did you realize that you had an amazing musical? Just a garden of great rock and roll there that you were growing up in. Because I didn't know it until I came down here and I started interviewing Boston engineers.
Right. I don't know if I ever appreciate. I mean, it's just you grow up with Aerosmith, Boston, all that
classic
stuff.
rock,
and it's just like, oh, that they're kind of from here. Like, yeah, it's weird. Yeah, it's good.
Was it WWAF or something? Was that our radio station?
Oh man, I want to say KDF is here. I was going to say KDF.
Yeah.
Oh man. We got a lot of the Rhode Island ones too, which was.
But I remember the term classic rock in my high school in the 80s,
And I know I've asked you before, but where in Massachusetts are you from?
So Concord, Acton, Wayland, those areas. I think
Amanda was from Palmer was from
riding the hockey
Concord.
bus to go to hockey practice, and the kids are going.
Oh yeah, right.
Yeah, they're playing. Another one rides the bus.
That's right. Yeah,
Weird Al.
There's a lot of great. There's a lot of great music from there. The Cars. Jeez,
Yeah.
I mean,
I didn't know any of it was from there. I just knew that was good music.
I got a new old turntable, and I was putting on Aerosmith, Get Your Wings. I was like, oh, what is such a good record this is. It's like all this stuff growing up. It's just like, man.
Of course, they're probably going down to New York to record it.
Probably, yeah.
Record plant, right?
Probably, yeah.
Although I don't know which records were where.
Yeah, but yeah, it's good. That Syncro Sound that I used to work at, that used to be owned by the Cars. So it wasn't at the time, but I did meet Rico Kasich. Did show up one day, and I was like I started as an intern, and then they sort of a staff engineer, and then they made me a weekend manager for a while, which I hated that. I'm just not that kind of. And then I became a staff engineer. But when I was for a little time period, I was a weekend manager. He just wandered in, and I gave him a little tour of like, oh, this is what's He told me what things used to look like, and he was a really nice guy. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Attention, all rock stars. iZotope has got you covered. With RX, Ozone, Neoverb, Nectar, and Vocal Synth, you'll have a collection of powerful apps and plugins that will help you get a professional sound in no time. Whether you're looking to clean up your vocal recordings with RX, master your tracks with Ozone, or add depth and ambience to your mixes with Neoverb, iZotope is your magic wand for awesomeness. Plus, with Nectar and Vocal Synth, you can easily add creative effects and unique textures to your vocals and instruments, from subtle mix enhancements to extreme sound design. iZotope takes your music and podcasts to the next level. Go to iZotope.com/rockstars and use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off any plugin purchase. OWC is your one-stop shop for flexible drive storage and connectivity solutions for your studio. The Mini Stack STX for your Mac Mini adds 2 additional drives over a universal SATA HDD SSD bay and an NVMe M.2 PCIe SSD slot, plus 3 additional Thunderbolt USB-C ports. Or the OWC Thunderbay 4 chassis, built like a tank, gives you 4 hot swappable 2.5-inch RAID configurable drive bays, plus an extra Thunderbolt 3 jack for daisy chaining up to 5 devices. Or check out the OWC Gemini Thunderbolt 3 dock with 2 RAID configurable drives and 7 ports of connectivity, including a front-side SD card reader, 1 gig Ethernet, 2 USB 3.2 ports, and a dedicated display port, plus an additional backward-compatible Thunderbolt port. Get your studio connected with the Mini Stack STX, Thunderbay 4, and Gemini Thunderbolt 3 dock at macsales.com/rockstars. Use the custom link in our show notes box because it's a great way for you to help support this podcast. So thanks, rock stars. Howdy, rock stars. We're back now for the jam session, aka the second half of the show. My guest today is Joe Costa, joining us here at the Toy Box Studio. Joe, you ready to jam?
Oh, yeah.
All right. So circling back a little bit, first thing I want to say, I want to finish mentioning what the hell we're recording on right now, because we get to do that on this show. So rock stars, right now, this in-studio live rig that I've assembled is my Sound Devices Mix Pre 10 2. I think that's what it's called, the full name. And it's awesome. It sounds really great. It's the built-in mic pre's. These are the Mic Tech PM9 dynamic mics, which I've been using the PM9 on all the episodes, at least for my voice. And that's it. And I just got like my little laptop set up and stuff. And I'm trying to figure out how I could do like a portable thing and set this up easily so I can do them like, in a moment's notice, just set up for an interview, because that'd be fun to do that.
You may have to design a little piece of furniture or something that will encase everything. And there's got to be a way to do it. There's got to be a way where you can just show up and be like, clink.
I know, it's funny. It's like that stuff matters. Like if you're a musician, musicians get it. They're like, I got to go do a gig. I got to just, I got to take this across New York City on a subway, and it's got to, roll on two wheels or be on my back, or down, New York. You guys get enough talk. Let's talk about Broadway in Nashville. That's a tough gig for musicians, right?
Wow. Yeah.
There is no subway. So you got to drive, but you can't park anywhere. So,
you know what? It's funny. I really never thought about that, because I assume, you just think of like, hey, there's a lot of musicians, and I know a lot of them that play downtown all the time. Where do they park? I mean, I didn't even know, like, where do you park?
I think you
not
park
like $20 or $30
across the river, and then you walk, with your thing on your back.
Yeah.
But so I want to do that for podcast interviews, and it's like there's so many little silly things that matter a lot, like the chair I'm in. I had to bust out WD-40 before. I was like,
right,
the chair can't squeak,
right.
Stuff like that, But I mean, that's true in the studio too. Like the acoustic guitar chair matters.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it does. All the things you don't think about until it gets sucked into the mic.
Have you ever done this where you've got a chair and it does squeak, but it's the one you want to use, so you just like you douse it in sound blankets?
I've never done that.
Just cover it. How about, have you ever set up a vocal tent in an apartment somewhere, like a blanket above and on all sides? And
I've never done that, but I can see where that would be useful.
How about a Faraday cage, man? Come on, tell us about a Faraday cage.
Oh, man. That involves electricity, right?
I think I heard that Buckethead would travel with a Faraday cage. Yeah.
What is that?
That's like the chicken Tesla? Wire cage in the control room, and you're inside it while you play electric guitar, so that no radio frequencies can get through it into your guitar pickups.
I see. I thought it was some sort of like, Nikola Tesla.
It's definitely that world. Faraday was one of those characters. And then it came up in Better Call Saul because his brother, Chuck, lines he's a tinfoil hat guy. So his line was part of it.
Is that Mike McKeon? Is that okay.
Not Nigel, but David St. Hubbins.
That's right. Yeah, Mike McKeon, yeah. I've only seen a few episodes of that show. It looks really good. My wife is all into it, though. She's like all caught up,
It's good stuff. I'm watching it with my girlfriend now. All right. So now that I've used up a little bit of your time, rock stars, talking about my recording rig, thank you. And thank you also, Sound Devices, for making such a great recorder. Let's mention a little bit more about the mixing on the Oratones, because the question I have for you, Joe, is what are the things you listen for on that? How loud do you have that speaker when you're listening? Are you using two of them or just one?
I am using two of them. Every once in a while, I'll put it in mono.
And do you have them spread out in stereo, or do you just put them next to each other? Like
the way it is, I have them on top of the NS10s, which are spread a little bit. So, but I have been in studios where I just put them near each other, because it's like the imaging. I'm not really. I mean, it's kind of nice, but I actually would prefer them if they were closer together. But the way I'd have to set up something to do that. So it's for ease of use, they just sit on top of the NS10s.
Right. So they're spread out a little bit, but you're not in the mix position. I'm
actually favoring the
So it's more real world, like they're like bookshelf.
They're off to the side.
I mean, they are called bookshelf speakers.
They are, yeah. And there's something about that off to the side thing or behind you.
But like, what's the stuff you listen for in there? Like for me, I've turned them way down. I turned the volume up one click, and I'm just listening for at the lowest volume balances, and I find that to be a useful thing. Not the only thing, but one of the useful things. Do you find that you can tell things about like compression there, or do you even tell things about EQ on those speakers?
Yeah, you would think, and I'm like you, I listen to it fairly quiet. Like, I wouldn't want to crank them for any reason, but low to medium volume. But I seem to, things reveal themselves like, like the vocal's too loud, or like electric guitars or piano, if there's just too much upper mids. Like, you would think like it's such a narrow band speaker that you wouldn't notice that much, but I can tell if something's just like, obviously the mid range is where it's like you'll turn it on and be like, ow. Well, I mean, I know it's mid rangey, but it shouldn't hurt, right? And then I'll listen to something else, like a completely different song, and go like, oh yeah, that's chill. Okay, well now what's the issue here? Okay, I didn't catch it in the NS10s, so what is the issue? And it's like you fix that, and you go to the NS10s. It's like, well, cool, it still sounds good in the NS10s. Okay, well that just revealed a problem that I wouldn't have heard on those, So yeah, I guess it's like guitar kind of things. It's obviously since it's
guitar kind of thing. So in other words, the mids of guitars competing with the vocals.
Yeah, exactly. You can hear if things aren't working with each other. Piano, guitar, vocal. I also like to make sure that I can hear the bass drum, at least as much of it that you can hear,
as much as you want to hear.
Yeah, and the
that's like the small speaker test
and the
for bass
and the bass guitar as well. If I can't hear any of that in there, then I've got to sort something out. Whether it's raising the volume until I can hear it, and then going to the other speakers and lopping off low end. Whether it's adding some sort of harmonic something to the bass, like a transformer type of thing, or a Saturn, or it's something that'll make it show up. But that's actually a good indicator. I like it to sound, not for a pun, but like balanced. It sounds like cool. That really sounds cool in the overtones. You just have to be careful. You don't want to scoop things too out in the overtones, or else everything will be too scoopy. But as long as you listen to other references of music you like, I went back and started listening to stuff like Devo. Like when I first got the overtones, I was like, let me just listen to older records that I know probably. They spend some time on the overtones, and Devo was like, wow, that sounds fun. I can hear everything. This is so cool. Michael Jackson records, I was like, I can hear everything.
Now the overtones are passive speakers, right?
They are. I have an amp for those. Yeah. And
did you find the amp matters much, or it's more?
It's what I had. I had 2 quad amplifiers. So one of them powers the NS10 and one powers the overtones, and they're not. I want to say. The watts are pretty low, and I don't know exactly what they are, maybe 30, 60. I mean, they're just low, but they just sound really good. I was like, well, I have these. They sound great on these, so I'll use these.
Yeah.
Those are more hi-fi power amps,
What about, there's so many things that are coming to mind. So would you make any high-end tweaks when you're using the overtones too?
I can. I'll be careful about it, but I can tell if something's just too cloudy.
Right.
It's like, I can add a little high end to that. A lot of times it'll show that your snare drum's too hot.
Right, it's just sticking out too much.
Sometimes it'll show that your kick and snare is too hot. It's just like, that's just too pokey. Okay.
Yeah. Pokey's a good word for that kind of stuff. And I like those because pokey, things that we can tell aren't right at low volume. I just find mixing and studio stuff, it's exhausting. It's a little bit exhausting, it can be. And so like the opportunities to make relaxed, calm decisions about like, oh, that just sounds wrong, at a low volume. I find those really, really valuable because because then you can do something about it and it's not wearing you out. Well, things can still wear you out, like your patience for the computer and the fact that it's going slowly or whatever, stuff like that.
Yeah, or something, or it's not opening, or like the session's not opening for some reason. I was on a panel, I don't remember which one, but it was with Vance Powell, and he made a good point about he takes breaks often when he mixes. I understand that, but I need to do that better. I realize when I'm not taking breaks, and the problem, it's only an internal thing. It's like I'm at a point where like, man, this sounded cool like an hour ago, and now it doesn't. well, that's a good indicator. Like, I need to get up and take a break, but I might be on something that I want to follow through. So I was like, okay, I don't want to interrupt myself, but I know I need to take a break. And then I'll go through this thing of following through, and then it's like 3 hours later. And it's like,
Yeah.
I know that if I take a break, when I come back in 20 minutes, it's going to all be revealed or not. It's going to be like, oh, I just needed to do X, Y, and Z and move on. It's a big time saver to take a break, really. But you do get in that thing where it's just like, but I'm on this thing. I almost have it figured out. I almost have this thing. So
well,
I need to take his advice and my own advice, because I do tell people to take breaks all the time. But I know that when you get on a thing and you don't want to leave it, because it's a creative thing, and it's like, okay, I feel like if I walk away, I'm going to get away from this. Although things sound really weird to me, let me just kind of power through for a second, and then maybe I should have powered through for 10 minutes or 15 minutes. But time goes away.
Well, there are elements of mixing that are just mundane, and you just need to go through the checklist too. And in those cases, we need our ears, but we also just need to go through the dang checklist.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even know why I said dang. That's not very rock and roll. Go through the damn checklist. But, like, for example, drum editing is something that can just be, even vocal comping. I can't saturate my brain too much in vocal comping. I do need to work really quickly. But there are things where I'm just like, you just got to finish, Lidge. Just finish this thing and then take the break. And so I can understand that. But it's also good to recognize that when I'm doing those tasks, don't make a creative ear,
right.
golden ear judgment call. Of course, I'd be borrowing your left golden ear for
the left one. Yeah. No, I have a friend who he starts working pretty early. He's got a studio behind his house, and he gets out there. I want to say he maybe told me like 7 or 8 or something like that. But he said he does all his creative stuff early. Yeah, and then by 2-3 o'clock, when he's kind of spent on that stuff, he'll do his like editing,
which also just kind of sucks because you're kind of spent.
Yeah, it's just like, but then he'll do the stuff like, well, then I'll do my editing, or if I've got some vocal tuning, if I feel like I can, he's not spent on that. Like the pitch stuff he can make the decisions on, but it's just like the other stuff. But he saves that kind of stuff for like later in the afterday. That's a good idea, actually.
Pitch stuff too. So that's something that I've found was very remarkable to me. Is when I'm doing vocal tuning now, when I'm doing. Yeah, if I was doing tuning, pitch stuff, but if I'm doing vocal comping, I go to the oritone, the small oritone, because I've found that pitch is really easy for me to hear when I'm on that little speaker, because I'm not distracted by the other instruments. I'm just hearing the voice really, and what it's sounding like on its own a little bit more.
It's revealing, and I think everyone's probably the same way, but I hear pitch way easier when the volume's just turned way down. Yeah. When it's turned up hot, things will go past you.
Yeah. And I've thought a lot about that. Like, why is that? I think there's a couple of thoughts about that. One is there's a lot more bells and whistles and big, great sounding speakers in stereo and the mixed position. There's more things to distract your brain. Your brain is probably just honestly slightly confused because it's like otherworldly. Because there's like phantom images, and it's like your brain's probably just busy reassembling this sound and making it sound like this wonderful idea in your head, versus the little speakers. It's just like, oh, there's nothing. My brain can relax now, and then you're just hearing what you're hearing. I also find that my left ear, like when I'm judging pitch in a vocal comp, I tend to turn my head to the right, so my left ear hears the speaker.
Sometimes I do that too. If something's really like, I don't know if this is bothering. Something's like, this is bothering me, because I don't like to tune unless the producer or whoever really wants that. But I just kind of fix things here and there as like, that's just bothering me. But I try not to do every single thing, But sometimes there's something that might technically be in tune, but it's just something's bothering me about the pitch, and I'll do what you do. It's like I'll just turn my head. So it's just one ear is facing the speaker, or I'll move it over to another set of speakers off to my left. And sometimes that helps, because, there's always that weird thing where like, yeah, it's in tune, but it doesn't sound right. And sometimes it's like, well, this has to be a little flat so it sounds in tune. But it's hard to hear it with the speakers in front of me, so off to the side helps with that.
Yeah, it's like it changes your mental perspective on it. So there's another aspect that I wonder about a little bit when you talked about like hearing the kick and the bass on the little speaker. So one of the tracks in your playlist in Rockstars, I highly recommend click down, maybe not right this sec, but after you listen to this, we've got Joe's playlist in the show notes, so you can go hear great records there. Some of the stuff from Caitlin Rose, I think that might be some newer stuff too. Nobody's Sweetheart, what a great sounding
It's a cool.
track
That's such a good record. Her last record I think was like 9 years ago, and she just, it's been that long. So it's such a good record. I love it, and at the point that we're talking now, it's not out. I mean, I've got a couple tracks on the playlist, but by the time this podcast comes out, I think the record will be out. So I'll try to add the whole record on there. But she's so good. Her vocals are so great, and she's been around forever.
When I heard it, I was like, Joe, putting the cool back in music. Cool, man.
But Jordan, it's like between her and Jordan's production. I mean, it's just, and they've worked together a lot before. They've known each other for a long time. So he just complements what she's hearing in a intuitive way, and it's just really good.
Well, it's got really killer, tight sounding drums on that too. So, what do you know about that? I mean, is that one of those classic combinations of live drum performance, but then really good use of samples and things to give it that consistency and uniformity in the sound?
Well, on Nobody's Sweetheart, that's the real drums, no samples. But when we were tracking that, in addition to my other mics, and that was in Sound Emporium B, so that's actually a liver room. Mm-hmm. I think we put baffles around it for that song. And I had some sort of a trash mic above, I think I had it above the bass drum, kind of at the beater side of the kick, kind of facing the side of the snare drum.
Yeah.
And they have this Sony mic over it. I don't even know what model it is. It's like, it's not like
it's not a C37.
It's not a C37. I have a pair of C48s. It's not that. It's like, I always can forget. It's just a condenser. It may not even be a condenser. I don't know.
Is it like Electret or something, like an old tape recorder?
I don't know, but it looks like a large diaphragm condenser, but it's not. It almost looks like it's skinnier than a C37. I don't know, but I tried it once and liked it. So for that duty, and I'm sure it's great for other stuff. But I used that, and I think I had it going through like I've got like a set of overstayer distortion. Nice. It's like a prototype that I got.
Jeff Turzo.
Yeah. He gave me this prototype, and it was some years ago. And it's like it does this distortion, and I'm trying to remember what it's actually called, because it's probably called something else in his line now. But so it creates distortion. And between that and like I got this trick from Joe Baldridge. I use a little old Radio Shack karaoke mic that blows up. I stick it behind the drums. But when we were doing that, Jordan was listening to when I was just bringing the faders up, and he said, can we just hear the kick snare in that or something? And I did. And he's like, yeah, I think that's kind of what I want for that. So that's the way we listened to it in the studio. When I got the session, he came it to be really clean, the session, but on it might've been kick and snare is what he gave it to me. He had the sketch cassette on each one, and he's like, I'm kind of thinking something like this, maybe you want to do something, but this is like kind of this thing, like kind of like a revolver kind of.
When you say sketch cassette,
it's a plugin called Sketch Cassette.
Oh,
it's
cool.
Like, yeah. Sketch Cassette 2, Roman numeral 2. I think he had those on the kick and snare, and I just liked it. I was like, well, I'm just going to do that. So I think I'd have to open up the session, but I think that drum sound is just the kick and snare through the Sketch Cassette, and I might have added a little bit of the overhead in there, but it sucked in so much stuff, and that's that sound. Yeah. I just basically left what he had on there because I loved it.
That's awesome. Well, all right.
And I use that plug quite a bit, actually.
From Aberrant DSP.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
And then when we were taking a break, let's circle back and mention this. You were talking about how much you enjoyed the Cush audio stuff too.
Yeah, my buddy Dexter Green had the Cush subscription for a year or two, and I tried something. We were doing a tracking session, and then we were done with tracking, and we were just kind of getting a little rough mix together. And I put the drums in a drum group, and I asked him, I said, hey, what's that? There's like a compressor you like to use from Kush on the drums. And it's this one called UBK plugin. And so I put it on there, and I was like, oh man, this thing's awesome. So then I started looking at the rest of the stuff. And so I was like, well, I got to do the whatchamacallit, the subscription. But his plugins are like, they're just different in a great way. There's he's got some, very mute plugin. He's got a compressor called a Novatron, which kind of does a lot of stuff. He's got that UBK compressor. I'm not even remembering. He's got a gold plate that's great, but it's all stuff that's just slightly different. And his videos are great. I think his name's Gregory Scott. And if that's not right, then you can edit that
sorry,
out.
Gregory Scott, whoever you are.
Yeah. Anyway, and I think Ben, on Ben's channel, he did do a video interview with Gregory Scott. Yeah, he seems like I've never met him, but he seems like a really cool guy. Really interesting take on music and compression in particular. He talks about, he has a video with that UBK where he's basically using it on stems of a mix, but he's talking about using the compressor more as, not as level control, but using it as like for more movement. And it's a really cool video. The way he does stuff, and it makes the drums move in a certain rhythm. He's not just squashing them. He's kind of doing this parallel thing with them, but doing certain things with attack and release that they're kind of making it, making it have some movement to it. Right. And it's like, oh, that's really interesting way to, I guess that kind of happens when you compress stuff. You do, the way the leveling happens will kind of change the groove a bit. But the way he kind of highlighted that was really, I liked it a lot.
That was one of the comments that Michael Brower made on the podcast. And when he talks about his mixing, he talks about compression creating bounce and movement within the track too. So that's a cool way.
Oh yeah, and the Ben Folds record we just did, Michael mixed it. So
groovy.
Yeah.
Right, hey, it's small world.
Small world. Yeah, Michael's great.
Every studio needs a good vintage mic for that classic warm sound. Whether you're looking for those airy highs, sweet mid-range, or silky low end, a good vintage mic can put the magic in your mixes. So it's no wonder vintage mics have been loved and praised by thousands of engineers for decades. The JZ Microphone Vintage Series are built by hand in Latvia using only the best electronic components and feature the patented Golden Drop capsule design for great detail and richness of tone that will bring that classic vintage vibe to your studio and be a real workhorse for your sessions. This time, our friends at JZ Microphones have come up with a special offer just for you, rock stars. Use the coupon ROCKSTAR to get 40% off the Vintage Series mics V67, V47, or V12, the mic you're hearing right now. Plus, they'll throw in a free shock mount worth $120 for a limited time at jzmic.com. Atom Audio introduces the all-new A-Series line of monitors, featuring the XART accelerated ribbon tweeter design, built-in DSP-based room correction, and speaker voicings, allowing you to customize your Atom Audio monitors to fit your control room. The A-Series will rock in any studio. Small studio spaces or immersive multi-speaker configurations are perfect for the A4V or the new A7V, the next generation of the incredibly popular A7X. Mid-sized rooms and narrow spaces will love the low profile of the A44H, expanding on the A7V sound, or the A77H, a true three-way midfield monitor delivering rich, spacious sound. And bigger studios will love the A8H, a three-way speaker and the pinnacle of the A-Series that delivers extremely accurate sound required for critical listening environments. Get the Atom Audio monitors and subwoofers that are right for your studio with an extended 5-year warranty at atomaudio.com. All right, so on Caitlin Rose's stuff, I'm still trying to circle back to my original question, which I will. Okay. But Caitlin's stuff, where did I put that? Oh yeah, I wrote a note, faraway electric guitars, room mics. So there's a quality to that production where it's like the tight drums, but there is like there's a depth in the, everything doesn't sound like a mic jammed right in your face,
Right.
So maybe talk a little bit about that. What is some approaches you do to recording? Is that intentional or does that just happen naturally?
I honestly don't remember. I'd have to open up the session and just see what I did. I don't know if I shoved stuff back or maybe that was like embedded in the sound.
Do you find that happens naturally sometimes when you just put a bunch of instruments in the same studio together, that the mics talk to each other in that way?
Depending, yeah. If it's like what we talked about earlier, if it's a session that everyone's kind of mixed themselves in the room, they will talk to each other. It seems like, because the leakage isn't going to be overpowering from one instrument, it actually sounds better with the other instrument leaking into this one, but it's a balanced sound.
Yeah. Something's on the left, something's on the right, but they cross over to talk to each other.
And to be honest, I just don't remember. Like, I don't remember if I added stuff to that, or maybe some of those guitars that Jordan sent had the distance embedded in. Like, I just don't remember.
But sometimes you might get tracks that feel a little too dry, and you'll add some things.
Oh yeah, like I love Pulsar. The Pulsar, I think that's the company. They make a Benson Echo Rec, which a lot of times I'll use to, not necessarily like, hey, I want a delay on this, but it does a nice kind of like depth.
So the Benson is that one of those oil drum echoes?
It's like a rotating drum. Yeah.
So it's not like trying to create it's not like an impulse response room kind of a thing. It's more of a space creator just through this
from the
effect.
delay. Sometimes I'll use a tight delay and just a bit of it to kind of move things back. And
do you find it useful sometimes to, you've got the guitars sort of over to one side, but the delay's over to the other side a little bit?
I've done that before. That could be cool. Yeah, if you need some sort of
just
created space. Yeah. Makes me want to open up that session now and see what I did, because it was a year or two, maybe a year ago. I mean, it's just coming out now.
It's default for record makers like ourselves.
Yeah.
We have to automatically purge our memory pretty much at the end of every day, or else we'll go crazy because we have to listen to the same music all the time, right?
Oh yeah, I don't like. There's certain things I do remember, and then some things I'm like, I have no idea, because a lot of times it's like a stream of consciousness. You just do like, let's try. That works great. It's like, and there might not be any forethought to it. You just like, hey, that was a cool thing. And sometimes that'll stick in your head. Like, remember that thing we did was really cool. Other times it's just like, I don't know. I just, at the time I did something and I immediately forgot like a month later what that was. And I'd have to look it up what I did,
Yeah. A lot of times if you ask me what are you working on? What'd you guys do this last week? I'd be like, I have no idea.
I have to really think about it, because I have no idea.
Session, anything.
I have no idea.
I finally accepted it's a survival tactic.
It is. Well, yeah, because you can't, I have a funny thing where my brain doesn't process lyrics until like much later.
Me too, man. Not until the very end. And like we'll be like doing final mixes and I'm like, oh, that's what the song's about.
Oh yeah. Or like, wow, that line was incredible. But I've heard that line in my head 1,000 times, or I've heard these lyrics 1,000 times, or whatever, because you're at different stages. You've done the vocal, maybe you're doing a vocal comp, and you hear the shapes and sounds of the words and it all makes sense. But then like I might be like lying in bed after the record's done and be like, and that's whatever that song is comes into my head, and those lyrics come into my head, and then I'm like, oh, that's really clever. That's cool. Like, but that part of my brain doesn't process the meaning of lyrics and how the story is going. It's just like you get a feeling of how the story is going, especially when you're mixing, and get an idea. But yeah, that like the actual meanings of stuff, my brain allows me to process it like later for some reason.
I like to think that goes in reverse for those who are lyric focused first too.
Right.
Like, the singer in our band, Chris, he'll be thinking about the concept of a song, and that's really important to him. And then, after we record it together and I've sort of had some vision for, the sound of the drums and the guitars, and later he's like, oh, it's a rocker this way kind of thing, or whatever, So, I guess that's just part of the creative thing. You're focused on the thing that you have some control over at that moment.
Yeah, I think my brain is compartmentalized on stuff like that. It won't allow. It only allows like the task at hand.
Yeah,
Yeah.
So Real Humans Body Count in the playlist. That's where I was headed before. Yeah. Talking about mixing rock with punchy drums.
Yeah.
But that I noticed had that kind of pumping compression.
Yep.
Feel on the bass drum, for example, but it's still really clear.
Yeah.
The whole mix itself.
Yeah.
Maybe talk a little bit about that. What what is that when sometimes we have rock tracks where if you heard the detail of the beat or on the kick drum, it would feel inappropriate.
Mm-hmm.
But when you hear it sort of pumping the band a little bit, that makes sense. Like, what is that?
Yeah.
Why is that a thing? Is it even intentional?
I don't know. I mean, it's like, I guess it's a cool byproduct. It's a song like that is fast, and the bass drum's like, it's quick. You can't have a bunch of low end in it because it'll just mud up. So those kind of songs technically are a lighter situation. Yeah, it might just be the interaction between everything. I mean, I don't remember if that was like one of my favorite things to put on the drum bus is Saturn plugins from FabFilter.
Okay.
That usually
where that goes on the drum bus. So
yeah,
like
I put it on the drum.
drums.
Yeah, and what that does is it kind of just it kind of tucks things in and widens them out the way the compressor works, and it's a really easy compress. It's like you have options on it, but I use the simple like warm tape option. I drive it up just a little bit, and then there's a compressor. It's a little knob, and I just turn it until it sounds good. It's either that or that. Maybe I started using that UBK compressor from Kush. I don't remember at that point, but yeah. And then maybe that might be the interaction with the two mix. I don't know. It's
maybe it's like the low end of the kick is affecting it, but the low end's not necessarily translating through the bus at the same time.
Right. And I probably had to shave off some low end of that too, just because it's like, again, it would just muddy up too much stuff because he's playing a lot of notes on the bass drum,
Yeah, that's an interesting point. It's we don't think about that always at first, but it becomes a thing that you begin to understand. Like tempo of a song will dictate the direction you might go in a mix, because it means that you either can or cannot have a bunch of low end because,
it'll get in the way.
Because it'll get in the way. It's just too much too often.
A lot of the metal records, with double basses and stuff, I mean, they're thin records, but they have to be. You can't, it's the nature of the tempo and the speed of the drumming,
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's, I mean, there's just no way around it.
And what was that? I forgot what your instrument was. Did you play anything?
Drummer. Yeah.
You're a drummer.
But not double bass drummer.
No double bass drummer.
Never did do that.
That's awesome. Did you have a pedal for the hi-hat in a different location though? Some drummers have like a hi-hat pedal over here, but they got another one over
I never went that far. No, just regular old, like a 4-piece Gretsch.
How about
kit.
a drum cage, man? Did you have a drum cage?
A drum Faraday cage.
Did you go upside down on the stage like Tommy Lee?
Oh yeah, man. Those
all
were
right,
the days.
So let's see. Caitlin Rose, talk more about that. Black Obsidian's got some great reverbs in it.
Oh yeah.
What are some thoughts you want to share about reverb stuff? Anything you're just excited about right now, or stuff you've been thinking about?
I do love, and I don't know if we talked about this one at the podcast before, but I really love the transatlantic plate. I don't know if you've heard that.
Yeah.
It's wonderful. I don't know if that's what I used on Caitlin's, but it just sounds so real. But reverbs are funny for me. It's like it's like I love plate reverbs, but sometimes in certain mixes and songs, it's like, okay, I know this needs space because it's too claustrophobic. Like it feels like the vocals too. So, I'll start adding reverbs, and sometimes I just can't settle on a reverb. It's just like, okay, well, this probably doesn't need reverb if I can't settle on it, but it's too claustrophobic. Okay, maybe it's this small room. That's not. So sometimes it's like a circular thing to try to figure it out. As much as I love plate, sometimes I'll put it on a vocal. I'm like, I hate that it sounds like I'm a plate. It's just, sometimes it's just too much. Yeah, reverb's funny. But again, it's with a tempo as well. I mean, if something's kind of quick, slow. Like in that case, that kind of had like a Radiohead kind of thing to it. So, yeah, I mean, I guess I'm not really answering your question. I don't know. I mean,
well, let's start with plate. So if you were going to use a plate, one of the first things I remember learning, when I was an intern about a plate reverb was, you can send it to the tape machine first and make that a pre-delay on the way to the plate. And then you realize, there's the pre-delay on a long reverb has a huge impact because it, when that reverb starts affects things that right. Really short bit of time in the beginning of a sound.
It gives you the sense that the vocal's a little closer while the sense of space.
Yeah. And then I don't remember so transatlantic plate, that is from Brian Charles, who's also been
Boston.
on the podcast. Yeah, Boston guy.
Oh, yeah. Rare Signals, I think.
Yeah, Rare Signals. And sadly, and Charles was on, Brian was on the podcast not too long ago because they had a tragedy where his studio
I know, that
was
fire,
lost
that's
in a
awful.
fire.
Yeah.
So hopefully that's coming back together.
But he did a great job on that plug. It's but yeah, I like.
I'm trying to remember if that one has the pre-delay.
It
one does have.
Yeah, it does.
Pre-delay built in.
Yeah, it's really good.
But like the Sound Toys little plate, for example, doesn't have a pre-delay.
It doesn't, and you can add to it. But sometimes I prefer that because it's just darker.
Yeah,
and if I need something darker, sometimes I'll go to that rather than go to transatlantic plate and darken it. But there's something about the Sound Toys little plate that nice and murky. It doesn't feel like it's getting in the way. I also love the BX20 UA BX20. It's just a nice long spring reverb. They're when it's appropriate for the chamber, the capital chamber is great. So that'll just fit at some points. It's just like but a lot of times I'll try to use it. I was like, I kind of want a long reverb, and I'll kind of go through the chamber thing, and it's just not. I was like, well, I'm not going to fool with this. It's just not a chamber type song. I like the Valhalla vintage verb. Sometimes that's just a straight go-to. They're hauled. It just comes up right out of the box. It's kind of nice.
All stuff is great. I've been getting that and using it a bunch. Howdy, rock stars. Do you ever feel like you're spending all this time watching YouTube videos, trying out mixing tricks, and tweaking version after version of your mixes, but it's just like not getting you anywhere? Have you ever wished that you could have more of a simple and straightforward process for creating a pro mix that wouldn't take you years to learn? Look, what if you could have a Grammy-winning mix engineer who understood all of your mixing struggles and could actually coach you through them? If these are any of the questions that you're struggling with, then the Ultimate Mixing Masterclass is just for you. Now you can discover this proven step-by-step mixing system from Grammy-winning mixer Craig Alvin for consistently creating pro-quality mix from your home studio that will sound amazing everywhere. Listen to this quote from one of the students. Absolutely the most informative and helpful block of information and mentoring on the mix process I've ever been a part of. It was like sitting behind a mix engineer for years, watching and picking up tips along the way, condensed into a 6 to 7 hour session. That's from David P. Look, if you already understand the basics of mixing, but you're ready to take your mixes to Grammy-winning quality, then go to ultimatemixingmasterclass.com and check it out. In fact, I'm so confident that you're going to love this, that if you can't get a great sounding mix within 30 days, just send me an email and I'll give you a full refund, no questions asked. So go ahead and take your mixes to the next level like you know you want to at ultimatemixingmasterclass.com. One of the nice tricks that I learned from Craig Alvin was the idea of putting something after these reverbs like Devil Lock or some kind of saturator thing. Just takes the reverb that kind of sounds cool in your big fancy speakers, and all of a sudden it just steps it right forward in your face and makes it like a bold. All of a sudden it becomes like a guitar effects pedal.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. Oh, that's a great idea. Yeah.
It probably makes it read on small speakers really well.
Right. Yeah. And then, you can go to your overtones and see if it's just like ludicrous or
ludicrous.
Ludicrous. Yeah, exactly. That's a great idea.
Put your reverbs in plaid mode.
Yeah, that's right. I don't do much stuff after reverb. I'm probably done a little bit, but that's a great idea. I mean,
probably the Saturn plugin would be great for that.
You could, yeah. I mean, that's just an overall good. I use it for the drum bus along with that UBK sometimes. Black Box from Plug-in Alliance. That's a big Michael Brower. He loves that. And I find sometimes that on the drum bus, but
I've been using that a little more recently too. That's modeled after St. Louis guy, I think, isn't it? Really, the Black Box was just wasn't that, unless I'm mistaking my storylines, isn't that modeled after something that was originally designed as a pedal steel throughput DI box that started getting used in the studio?
Oh, I don't know, but I have seen that. Joe Pizzapia has that pedal for when he plays steel. I didn't know that was related to that.
I could be way off base here, but I'll see if I can. The power of having a computer in front of me, I can Google while you talk here.
But that's cool. The whole Plug-in Alliance line is. I mean, that's just great. I love it. But yeah, I'm getting away from your reverb talk. Yeah, I mean, it's
How about guitar pedals? Are you using those in the studio as part of your mixing process?
not anymore. We used to, when I used to work with Joe Baldridge, when we were on consoles all the time and stuff, he used to always have pedals and things for his effects returns. And that was really fun. You know, sometimes when I'm recording, I'll record that karaoke mic through I've got a Memory Man. Sometimes I'll put it through the Memory Man to give it some fun delay. And sometimes it's perfect for that. It's just like, and it can be challenging because they're working on a tempo and I'm trying to dial in the,
right. It's like,
it's so, you barely touch the delay time and then I'll get it right. It's like, that's too slow. Let's quit. It's fast. I was like, I got to figure this out again.
Yeah, that's a fun one. That's something that I saw Vance Powell first introduced me to, that idea of having a mic with a echo on it, and that becomes part of the drum sound.
Mm-hmm.
And then I did that on a session. It was pretty cool. But, again, that's one of the things that comes up sometimes. It's like, here you are mixing in the box, but you're tracking in studios. Is bridging that gap between as we go digital, and a lot of us might be in a Pro Tools, or a just whatever our DAW is in our home studio. And it's like, how do you do some of these tricks that kind of you invent in the analog realm at the tracking stage? Like, you can do them after the fact. Yeah, sure, I could record the drums and then take a plug in and add this delay afterwards. But now it's not part of the creation of that drum
right.
part.
There is something to that, because you would think like, I can just add it afterwards. But it's when you get it going down and it's committed,
and they're hearing it in the headphones.
They're hearing it that way. And it's just like, it's affecting something. And that's the cool thing about, working on analog. It's like, at least for me, it's a completely different mindset. It's like, okay, well, I know when this gets transferred to Pro Tools, you can do stuff later, but it's like, I want to get this on the way in. Like, I want a sound on the way in. And, depending on how long we're going to work on tape, I might want to brighten things up extra because, the tape after a day or two will mellow out and your tones will mellow out. And so everything's a little too dark. It's like, well, I don't know. I mean, we used to have to, I remember that was coming back to me on Jeremy's record. We met ahead of time and he was just like, I kind of want, like, he referenced a few things, like maybe some Bob Dylan stuff. He's like, I kind of want this kind of bright with no low end and, this and that. And it was like, okay, cool, we can do that. So I remember when we were tracking, it's like, okay, well, if I want to retain this brightness, I'm gonna have to go like one click overboard, recording to tape, because in the next 2 or 3 days it'll settle back
right
to where I kind of want it, And depending on if we work on this, like, I don't know if we're just going to be dumping this to Pro Tools in 3 days, or maybe we come back and work on it another week or two. Like, I don't know. So I don't want to, I don't want it to keep getting duller and duller and duller. Not the end of the world. You can brighten it up
like
later.
Fleetwood Mac, you can start to see through the tape, by the
That's
time
right. Well, yeah, exactly. I knew it was going to be that bad, but yeah, so I was just like, oh yeah, I remember we used to brighten things just a hair more, so you wouldn't have to fight it. And then of course all noise would come up. Of course we can fix the noise now. But yeah, you just approach things a little differently. It's like, I want this to be, now you would think you want to approach that way in Pro Tools when you're tracking. And I try to do that, and I usually do, but there's something about like, hey, it's going to tape. I just want to think of it that way, and I want to get this a certain way. It's a weird mental thing,
Yeah. No, it's interesting that, a previous way of working meant that you had to think in advance about something, because then it would shift and settle in. It's like tuning the guitar string, and you tune it a little bit, you tune it here, and that by the time you strum it, it's going to settle back and pitch slightly or something like that. Whereas in the computer, it's not quite that way. It's a little bit, it's this idea that what you do right now is going to come up exactly the same later.
Right.
As long as the plugins still work and all that kind of stuff.
I mean, and I've been on projects with just going into Pro Tools where, I might be in a space which is just mostly mic pre's with a couple of EQs. So it's like, well, and we want to move quick. So it's like, cool, it's all going mic pre's. It's all cool. It's like, I'm just going to throw some stuff on the back end to make it feel the way I want to. And, it's not committed that way, but that's just a different way of working, and it's like.
Right, where you're not doing a lot of processing on the recording stage. No,
because I can't, because it's like, well, I mean.
Then it becomes about room sounds and mic placement and performance.
That's right. Yeah.
Questions and things like
and then
that.
Throw on some Pro Q3s on the back end to do that. Which, that's fine too. And that gets your result.
So do you find that, if you were to go across your discography and listen to the different styles and productions and, the different kind of qualities of sound and space and everything like that, how much of that would you attribute to arriving at that identity for the track in the mix stage post-recording versus, arriving at that identity for the song and the production decisions as you're recording it? Let's just stay on Caitlin Rose for just a sec. So that track, you said Jordan did a great job with the production, but you guys recorded it over there.
It's Sound Emporium, but we did it too. We did it. So the part that I tracked was to a point. So it was like, drums, bass. Jordan can play a lot of stuff. So he may have been playing electric or acoustic. He may have been playing piano. And of course that was even 2 years ago. Cause it just,
but then it came back to you for
over 2020. Yeah. So I can't answer to that. Like it was at a certain point, but there was more work to be done.
Yeah.
So I don't, he sounds like he had the intention of when he did the overdubs to intend it the way they were hearing it. You know? So when I got it, it had a sound already, which was cool.
Do you sometimes find yourself taking like a drums and putting like a crazy slap tape thing on it? And it's like
sometimes.
A whole new identity for.
Oh yeah, sometimes. Yeah, sometimes. And I know I've done that in the past, and I can't give an example. But a lot of the I'm thinking of like a lot of the Folds records where he knows about like what problems you could run into in a mix, which is very helpful. And he's such a good arranger that, a lot of times we'd be tracking and he's working out a piano part and he'll come in and listen and he'll go like, he'll call himself the jackass. He'll be like, the jackass pianist is playing too much in the left hand.
Right.
And he said, and if you were going to be mixing that, you'd have a nightmare. So let me go ahead and simplify that. So it's like, thank you. Like he knows like, how am I going to make that work with the bass, But he was like, that's cool. But you know what? Because it'll be easier when you mix it.
Yeah.
And it'll make more sense.
Yeah.
It's like, oh yeah, you're right. So a lot of that stuff had a sound to it basically before I mixed it, because we just kind of had that sound. Of course you add delays and things here and there and all that, but we didn't change, we didn't do it completely change the sound of it,
Yeah. I find that when I'm mixing it, I think instinctively I'm just trying to pull out the things that are already intended in the music.
That's what I do too. I find it weird if and I don't know if I've ever gotten things this way, but I know people have. It's like if you get things and it's just like, hey, we want to make this a blah blah blah, and it's just like, well, it's not recorded that way. Like, what do you mean? Like, so on the mix end, I've got to turn it into something. The intent wasn't there. I mean, maybe later on, like, hey, we'll do this when we mix. It's like, no. I mean, if that's the intention, do it on the front end. Even if I don't know. It's much easier to deal with that way. You want to create something on the back end that's completely changing the song. It's weird to me.
It's almost like mixing can feel like changing the filter and the hue of the colors slightly and things like that.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah. Yeah. I try to bring out, like you're saying, like I try to enhance the good in it, of what it's trying to be. And I try to take it from there. It's like, I think this is what this is trying to be. Let me kind of put, my way of hearing that. I have heard people of like getting something like, we want this to be kind of heavy and stuff. It's like, well, you didn't record it that way. Everything's clean. Like, why did you not record it? Like, how do you do it after the fact? Like you can, but it's not, I don't know how good that would come out,
So you work with a lot of variety of singers too. I mentioned great lyricists like Amanda Palmer and Jeremy Ivy. But also, I've recently been recording a female vocalist in a kind of a country style, and I'm reminded once again of that power of singing. Like sometimes you get a singer on a mic and it's like, my voice is smoky and like I have to yell for somebody to hear me and the group of people at the bar, and then people are like, why are you yelling? And it's like, well, because otherwise you wouldn't hear what I just said. Sorry, I didn't mean to spit in your face. But like then some people, just have this voice where it's like they can project and they can go from the low verse to the chorus. And it's like, there's just power on the mic. And I find, there are challenges involved with that. So I wonder if you want to talk a little bit about recording singers, the difference between a vocalist that is, maybe a narrow dynamic range versus a vocalist that has got a big dynamic range? What are some of the challenges in a female voice? Like, do you sometimes put up a mic and then they hit a note and now it's like, you're like, why does it sound like it's crapping out somewhere?
Yeah,
Where the hell is that?
I remember when I first started, and maybe not when I first started, but when I moved to Nashville, there was a few times where, I'd be like, what is distorting on this vocal? And I'm like looking at, like, I'm not killing the mic pre. I'm not distorting it to tape. I was like, what is distorting? And then you walk outside and you listen to the vocalist, male or female, just depends on what, it's like, oh, that's coming out of your mouth.
Sometimes the sound is just the sound is coming out of your mouth itself.
Sometimes a tube mic will, and then of course, if it's a tube mic, it'll enhance that,
Yeah. So in my situation, I was using a U67 and then, the self-doubt as an engineer, you're like, we always, everything's our fault internally. That's our brains. We're like, oh yeah, it's your fault. It's your fault. What are you doing wrong? I always wonder, it's like, can you use a tube mic are there some tube mics that you can't use on certain vocals?
Yeah, it's weird. And and it's such a personal choice for different singers. I just did a shootout with a artist named Dylan Taylor. We did a vocal shootout and she's got like a higher voice. And so, I mean, we set up a ton of mics. I mean, it was just like the studio it was in Nashville. It was called Skinny Elephant, I think, was the studio. He had a lot of great mics. And we brought, we put up a 67. I brought, funnily enough, which is, I love this mic, I brought a Warm Audio 67.
Right.
Now, I wasn't going to bring it. The producer was like, no, bring it because it might be, I was like, well, they've got a 67. We already have that flavor. He's like, well, bring it anyway. I'm glad I did. So we set up 67, Warm Audio 67. Let's see. Then there was an M49 and a C37, Sony C37, Sony C48. And I think I can't believe I'm remembering all these. A Beyer M160 and an SM7.
Ooh, wow.
And I had worked with Dylan before, and I used an SM7. But we wanted to check this stuff out, and I just said to her, like, hey, I know we're listening to all this stuff, but please speak up if you're singing into something and you're like, what, I love this, So okay, so she sang into the 67 and it sounded cool. It sounded really cool, but it had like this honk to it that I was like, it might not be the mic, but it's definitely got a cool thing going on. I could probably pull some of that out. And we're in the same family. Let's do the Warm Audio 67. She sang into it and she automatically was like, I love this. What is this? I was like, Warm Audio 67. She sang into it. It sounded great. And the cool thing about that Warm Audio 67 is it's that same family of 67. It has that sound to it, but it does have a little more of I think I found it. It was like 180, 200, somewhere in there. It's got a little more of that. So I find that
it kind of fills out the body.
For her, it just filled out that whole thing that she didn't have. Like, it was just like, it cradled that part of her voice,
Right.
So then we went down the line and listened to everything. And it came to the thing where, like, well, the Warm Audio 67 was the one. SM7 was the second one for alt options, And then I find on other vocalists with the Warm Audio, like, it'll sound great, but sometimes I just got to pull just a little of that 180, 200, just to, not even a lot, like half a dB one. And all of a sudden it just, but
pull it up a little
pull
bit.
it down, actually.
Pull it down. Okay.
Unless I've had backed them off a bit, but it was such a good mic. But in a way, that's like, that cradled her. That was just like what her voice needed. And she loved singing into it. She just noticed it immediately. So.
Yeah. Well, I love doing shootouts when I
and it's the tube mic, and it didn't do the harmonic, there are some singers that are incredible. And then I was mixing a record once, and I can't remember what record it was, but she sounded so good. But I kept hearing this hair on the vocal, and it turned out I talked to the producer, but every once in a while there's like 2 or 3 songs. I'm like, well, that's super clear, And so I was like, what's the difference? He said, well, those were on an M49. And I said, well, what were these 3 on? He's like, well, 414. I was like, oh, okay. So then I was thinking,
old
like,
or new 414?
I don't remember. I don't know, because I wasn't.
Because they can sound a little different.
Yeah.
Right?
And so I thought in my head, like, if I ever record her, as much as that M49 sounded cool, it was bringing up, I think she had a little bit of that in her voice already, and it was just accentuating that. It wasn't bad. It was cool. It was a warm thing, but there was something about that 414 that I just kind of preferred. So that was good to file away. Like, oh, it's a good option for somebody who is, the voice is kind of like exaggerating that. Like the harmonic distortion will come out. Like, it's like, oh, you've got harmonic distortion. I can add some to that, So I guess getting back to your tube mic thing, I guess it just all depends on what's, what they're doing.
Yeah, it's frustrating because sometimes you can't know until you're there, No, and then you have those sessions where you're like, I just need to set up the best mic, and we don't have enough time to shoot them all out.
And Caitlin was at SM7. She loves that. And it's like, we did scratch vocal on the days of the tracking. And I just when we do scratch vocals, I usually just put up an SM7 because even though vocals are different for every vocalist and all that stuff, mics are different for every vocalist, SM7 usually will sound good to me. Like every once in a while,
right?
Yeah, every once in a while it doesn't work, but it's very rare. And usually for scratch vocal, unless someone really wants something else, that's what I put up. And then that gives me an idea of like, how does that sound?
Yeah, sometimes that's the great choice.
Sometimes it's the best choice. And then like, I love U47s, but I've heard them sound awful on vocals. Like, and a lot of times they sound incredible on vocalists, but I've heard some vocalists where it's like, it sounds like the mic's broken. And then it's like, you put them on an SM7 and it sounds incredible. And then that exact same 47, someone else will step up to it and they sound incredible. So it's just like, to me, I think it's a finicky vocal mic, it can be.
Yeah.
Like to the point where I thought, it was on one artist and I was like, God, there's something wrong with that mic. And, someone was doing a background vocal and they came up to it and I'm like, whoa, it sounds incredible. It's just like, so it's a hand in glove kind of fit, but the SM7 seems to kind of like be a more of a sure bet if you have to do something quick.
It's the worst feeling when you're doubting the mic too, because you're like, as the engineer, you're certain that this is probably the take that they really want to feel great about. And you're like, and I've just ruined it.
And you'll be safe on a SM7. I mean, it's just like it'll sound good. Yeah. But there was one woman we were working with that she had a super low voice, like really low. Like I think I was mixing it and I was like, am I really rolling off like 125 hertz out of her vocal? Like but that was on an SM7. And I think, oh, well, that might not be the mic for her. Like,
right.
I mean, I made it work, but it's like,
Then those are ways that you can tell that maybe it's not the wrong mic.
Yeah, it just was too like.
So give a tip for the rock stars of trying out some different mics. What are some right ways to do it? What's a wrong way to try out different mics with a singer? Maybe like 5 seconds before you're supposed to go for the vocal.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if I guess there's a couple stages, so you can figure this stuff out if you're doing a scratch vocal with a band. See, that's the other thing too. Scratch vocals could potentially turn into real vocals. But if someone's like, I want to do vocals later, blah, blah, blah. I mean, that gives you a good opportunity, set up a few things if you have them, like a dynamic, like SM7 if you have it, or RE20, some sort of condenser or a couple, like if you have a 414, it's a little scoopy, but that's a sound. Something from a Neumann family, it's a little more mid-range, like an 87 or...
And then like the SM7 and the RE20, those can be good options if there's other sounds nearby and you need isolation.
Oh, yeah, that too. Yeah. If you need to, SM7 is great for that. But if you're isolated and scratch vocal, that's a good time to try out, like, hey, on this pass, let's try, what do you sound like on the 414? Hey, what do you sound like on the, and then you can make notes and go like, hey, that's going to be cool, that's a good way to do it. If you have a vocal, if you didn't do that and you have time, and you're not in a huge time crunch, it's like, hey, why don't you come like the day before, or, come a few hours before, or just let's make today like a vocal day, or like a shootout day, and let's just see what, and I would just do it in groups. Like you've got your dynamic, you've got your your condensers, but a few different flavors of condenser. Maybe you've got a ribbon or two, and you may find that different things are better for different songs. Like if someone's screaming, the SM7 will handle it, probably sound great. But still try the other mics. If it's kind of like a smoky kind of song or old school, you could try a ribbon with the darkness and maybe have something on the back end of it. If it's too dark to add EQ to it, it's like, I like to do that sometimes. Like, hey, it's a dark mic. Let me commit some EQ to it. If you're not comfortable with committing EQ, just do it on the back end. But at least you'll know, like, hey, if I add high end to this, it's going to sound good. Or
right.
If I'm adding high end, but I don't like it, it's like, well, maybe that's not the mic then. It's like, yeah, it's dark. We'll add high end later. It's like, edit now and see what's happening, you know?
Yeah, and that's funny because that's probably a really different approach that's digital versus analog days, where like you wouldn't want to add high end to things in analog days because you've been bringing up all that tape hiss and stuff.
On the back end, you really want to get it. You really want to get it on the front end as possible. If you're like, hey, this ribbon's cool, but let me do a bunch of, you know. And I remember working with Joe. I mean, we'd do vocals, you know, and he would, I think he would have like a Soundtech after it and just kind of and like get an EQ curve that he liked, and that's the way he printed it, you know.
Yeah. This episode is sponsored by Recording Studio Rockstars Academy. Are you ready to take your recording, mixing, and mastering to the next level and make your best record ever? Then visit the Academy to find the course that's right for you. Want to record killer drums in your studio? Then check out Rockstars of Drums to learn how to record, edit, and mix pro-sounding drums with a professional Nashville session drummer in a Grammy-winning studio. Or if you're ready to start mastering your own records at home, then check out Rockstars of Mastering, where I walk you through exactly how I mastered my own record, Skadoosh, the soundtrack to this podcast, in fact, using nothing but plugins in PreSonus Studio One. These techniques would work for you no matter what DAW you're using right now. And if mixing is your focus, then check out my free course, Mix Master Bundle, where I show you how to mix using stock and free plugins in Pro Tools. Plus, you get a look at how I recorded everything in my studio and multi-track downloads to practice your mixing and even include in your mix portfolio if you want. Are you ready to make your best record ever? Then go to mixmasterbundle.com to get started now, or look for the clickable link in the show notes of this episode. So let's talk about S's in vocals. What are some thoughts here? How often, when do they become a problem? Are they always a challenge that you're having to address? Are they only sometimes a challenge you're having to address? And how do you handle it?
I find sometimes, and it just depends on the vocalist, and it's always funny. It's it could be a vocalist that has a dark vocal. They have a dark voice, but then you start adding high end, all of a sudden the S's come out. Like you didn't even hear them before. Yeah. Now all of a sudden it's like, well, it sounds great, but the S's are tearing my head off. I find it sometimes. It's not all the time. And I just throw a DBX 902. Like the UA's got the version of that, their version of it. I still that on the back end. If it's really, really bad, I'll try to put.
I still got one in the rack right there.
Oh yeah, man. If it's really, really bad, I'll put one in the beginning of the vocal chain in what I'm mixing. I don't like to commit de-essers while I'm tracking because with my brain, de-essers are funny. I'll think they sound cool at first, and then like after I take an ear break, they sound like they have a lisp. Yeah. And I don't want to commit that just because it's like as the mix goes along, sometimes I back off of it. Sometimes I add it. It's like one of those things where like I like to wait till later. So, but that being said, if it's really bad, sometimes I'll put a de-esser before everything on my vocal chain while I'm mixing, and then I'll put one after it to doing like share the work. But a lot of times it's like the last thing I put, and I just make sure it's not, giving people lisps and all that stuff.
So my first internship was at it was a video production house. So the audio was audio for video, and there was a video production going on where they had these kids in, and the kid had a lisp or something like that, and the engineer was like, hold on, I'll go. And he went into the other room, he went and then he just edited it in, and he added the S back
he added them back in.
Yeah, with his own voice to the kid's lisp. So that was working. So there you go, rock stars. If you over S it, you can always bring it back, right?
If you can pronounce it, yes, yeah.
Just sing along.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I find that, that de-essing thing, it's funny. Like I find myself caught between, should I do a lot of processing to this vocal or should I do a lot less? And I guess they're just different worlds to live in. Like, sometimes the sound I'm looking for is that more pure with just a little bit of the LA2A, just barely moving kind of thing. In fact, I was exploring that just the other day, and I was struck. It was the only LA2A plugin I've got is that CLA one. Mm-hmm. But putting it on, and the meter wasn't even moving, and I thought it was a matched level, but I put it in and out. And I'm like, oh nope, it's still, I can hear it's doing a thing. So like, you really got to be careful about that. But then sometimes like processing the shit out of the vocal and then you have to de-ess the shit out of it too.
Oh,
and
right.
that can be the cool sound. So
yeah, it's funny. Yeah, there are some vocals where it's like, the same vocalist, but one song feels pretty even, and I just do some very kind of, broad kind of compression, nothing too crazy, and it sits there. Sometimes it's like, man, this is just not sitting. And so I've got like 2 or 3 doing like, not killing it, but two or 3 different types of compressors just to try to wrangle it in, and it's just, and then you still have to do a bunch of vocal rides. It's like, I don't know why they're all over the place on this, or that's the impression. I don't know. It's so
yeah, I
strange.
mean, like this recent session I did, we did some vocals. We got to the end of the session, we did a track, and I put the Arouser plugin on Pro Tools while she was tracking, and then I gained it up a lot more.
That's like the distressor, right? That's like the slate to
yeah, and I don't know,
something
somehow,
like
maybe it was the song, or maybe it was the fact that added compression was amped up a lot more in the headphones. But on that one, I all of a sudden didn't have all the issues I was having with the, where I was doubting the 67 on earlier ones where there were louder notes. And maybe it was just, maybe it was a combination of things, but it's always interesting to me to like try and figure it out. I guess where's the magic bullet? Where's our magic bullet?
Well,
man?
I tell you, I'm a big user of the Soothe plugin.
Yeah, I finally just got it.
And it's like, it's one of those things, I hate saying it, but it's like, how did I not work with this? I mean, it's just like all these strange little harsh resonances that you hear in vocals. And it's like, oh, thank you. And now with, the Soothe 2, I mean, it's great for the low end stuff. I mean, there's a couple people I work with. It's like they get the resonance in the low end. It's like 2 something, 100 something, all of a sudden that'll come out. So I can EQ that out, but sometimes it feels better to let Soothe just kind of pull it down.
Yeah.
And that'll just all of a sudden sit in better. But man, I love that with cymbals.
Oak Sound, I think.
Oak Sound. Yeah, Oak Sound. And sometimes that's nice when you can't get a bass guitar to sit in there. Like the bass player's like not laying into it enough, or their finger tone is weird. And, you'll get these weird things ballooning in the low end that, you're trying to ride
notes.
it, and it's like, why am I riding this bass even though I have compression on it? Sometimes you can focus in on the low end of that, and it'll pull those resonances out, and that really helps.
Yeah, I was really amazed. I put it on a bass part where there was one note that was just going crazy, and it was able to just completely kill that note. And then I was like, okay, I actually need the note. I can't not have the note.
I can't not have it. But yeah, right, exactly. But yeah, that thing's a miracle plug, man. It's like, it's crazy.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, dude, we are running up on the end here. I don't remember if there are some great tracks in the playlist Rockstars. One of the things that Joe talked about on the last episode, which was a lot of fun, was working with William Shatner. I don't know if any of the records are more recent. I think there might be some more recent stuff, but you got any other story you want to share about working with
Shatner? That was a long time ago. I can't remember if I might have told it on the last one about the
coupons.
Yeah, I probably did.
Really
I told it on the last one. That was the fun. Yeah, he was interesting guy. I mean, I worked with him for a week. We did the record, was longer than a week, but he was in town for a week. But he was a riot. I mean, the big thing I remember, he was so interested in everything.
Really?
Like, it wasn't like, okay, yeah, we'll do this. He was like, he asked so many questions and was truly like, he wanted to learn about this stuff.
That's great.
What do you mean you just punched something in? Wow, you did it that fast? That, how does that work? It just, oh, okay, well, you don't know how this works. Well, that's how that's worked. Oh, that's interesting. And now you would do that all the time, or something, it just sort of, he just loved it. I remember the first day, and I might have told this in that last one too, but the first day we were still in Radar at the time, and we had recorded him doing a bunch of speaking through, it was like sort of an interview, but then he would speak through stuff. Like he did the Hindenburg address, like not the address, but the reporting of the Hindenburg disaster. And he did stuff like that. And so after the fact, I went to the Radar, and I think I had to edit a few things. And so I'm working, and all of a sudden, like, there's something over my left shoulder, and I look, and he's just got this big, like, video camera, just videoing everything. He was so excited about, like, like what was going on,
That's
really cool.
Man.
And
that's awesome.
now the man's been to space now, so
Oh, really? Is that I didn't.
Oh, he went up in the.
He went up in one of the first.
He went up in the
SpaceX.
How long has this been now? Probably what, 6? Time doesn't make sense now anymore. Was it 6 months ago? 7 months ago? He went up in not SpaceX. It was the Jeff Bezos.
Oh yeah.
He went up. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's so funny. Well, awesome, dude. Well, thanks for hanging with us on Recording Studio Rockstars again, man.
Yeah, this is great. I appreciate you having
me. Thanks for joining me in the studio here. And Rockstars, thanks for listening. Let the Rockstars know, where can they go learn more about you and check out your work?
Let's see.
What if they're ready to make their next hit record with you?
Well, if I do have Joe Costa Mixer Engineer on Facebook, and you'll have to put down the Instagram. Instagram and Twitter are not exactly the same, and I can never remember which one it is until I look at it.
If you send it to us, we'll have it in the show notes. So
okay, cool. Yeah, I'll send it over to you. One's like Costa71, but I can't remember if that's the Twitter or that's the Instagram one. So I never look at my own handle.
Do you ever get direct messages and stuff like that?
Everyone
communicate.
I
find that's a thing that I remember to use sometimes.
Direct message every once in a while.
Message somebody on Instagram. It can work.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, I think I've gotten them before. Some of it's spam, you have to watch out.
Hopefully we're not the ones creating the spam.
No.
Well, awesome. Well, dude, great to see you.
All right, I look
forward to seeing you around the studio.
Yeah.
And Rockstars, thanks for listening. We'll see you in the next episode. Cheers. Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, then please share this episode with your friends on social media and leave a rating and review on iTunes to help the podcast reach more rock stars like yourself. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to rsrockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And remember to hit the subscribe button to keep up with weekly episodes. And if you're ready to make your best record ever now, then head over to Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can start with my free course at mixmasterbundle.com. And if you want more free content from Recording Studio Rockstars, all you have to do is go to rsrockstars.com/email. Again, that's rsrockstars.com/email to enter your name and email, and I'll keep you in the loop with articles, videos, podcast updates, and even free gear giveaways for your studio. Just look for the link in the show notes below. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for being a rock star. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music. Hey, rock stars. I want to give a big thank you to our amazing sponsors who help make this episode possible. OWC, JZ Microphones, Atom Audio, Isotope, Spectra 1964, and Sampley. Plus, remember to use these coupon codes for special discounts. At isotope.com/rockstars, use the coupon code ROCK10 for 10% off any plugin purchase. At jzmic.com, use the code ROCKSTAR for 40% off the V47, V67, or V12 microphones. Plus, get a free shock mount worth $120. And at Sampley.app, use the coupon code RSR20 for 20% off. And at recordingstudiorockstars.com/academy, use the coupon ROCKSTAR for 10% off. If you enjoy Recording Studio Rockstars, then please check out our sponsors using the link in our show notes, because it's a great way to help support this show. These are all things that I use in my own studio, and I highly recommend them for your studio as well. They're going to help you make your best record ever. I want to also thank our fantastic team here at Recording Studio Rockstars, Vlad Weselchenko and Braden Stremming, for additional podcast and video production. Thanks so much for listening, Rockstars, and we'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.